When my grandmother died, the news struck me like distant thunder, soft at first, then gradually overwhelming. I hadn't visited her in nearly a decade, but our bond remained, hidden away like an old photograph that occasionally catches your eye. As her sole surviving heir, I inherited her vast property, a deteriorating estate concealed in a remote pocket of coastal Maine, away from curious neighbors and modern conveniences. The estate had a name that few remembered, Ravenwood Manor. It sounded like something from those old horror novels I devoured during my university days, but the reality proved even more peculiar. The manor had weathered centuries, situated on a cliff overlooking the turbulent, fog-shrouded ocean that extended endlessly. The villagers nearby, as I would eventually discover, refrained from discussing it. When they did, they spoke in whispers, as if merely mentioning the place might attract unwelcome attention. They possessed knowledge, secrets about my family's past that had been kept from me. But that didn't concern me. The estate was mine now, and with it came the unsettling duty of untangling my grandmother's mysteries. I arrived in the early evening. The pathway to Ravenwood Manor was overgrown and serpentine, appearing untouched for decades. The manor itself stood ahead, a shadow against the fading daylight, its windows vacant and lifeless like the hollow sockets of a skull. I parked and approached the entrance, keys clutched tightly, my pulse quickening with a strange sense of expectation. The atmosphere surrounding the manor was dense, oppressive, as if the very air resisted my presence. I experienced the oddest sensation of being observed, despite not having encountered another soul for miles. The first evening passed without incident, aside from the manor's disconcerting quietness. There was no electrical buzz, no sound of contemporary existence. Only the groaning of aged wooden floors beneath my feet and the faint murmur of the wind outside. The manor seemed to possess its own vitality, as if it was monitoring, anticipating. I conducted a brief exploration, but fatigue overtook me, and I resolved to continue my investigation the following day. The primary bedroom was expansive but neglected, and despite the stale odor, I found myself drifting into sleep almost instantly. However, that slumber was brief. At some point during the night I awakened, completely alert, every fiber of my being tense. It was that feeling when something feels wrong, but you can't identify what. The manor was too silent. And then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping noise, like someone gently knocking on a door somewhere deep within the manor. I sat upright, straining to listen. The sound originated from below, somewhere beneath the floorboards. It was deliberate and measured, like the ticking of a timepiece. But there was no clock in the manor, at least none that I had discovered. I remained motionless, frozen in place for what seemed an eternity, but eventually the sound ceased and the silence returned. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I began my proper investigation of the manor. The daylight did little to alleviate the oppressive atmosphere, but I persevered, determined to comprehend this place. The manor was filled with remnants from another era, antique furniture, dusty portraits of long-deceased ancestors, and books. Countless books. In my grandmother's study, I discovered shelves upon shelves of old, leather-bound volumes. Most were in Latin, some in languages I couldn't identify. But what truly captured my attention was a small, locked drawer in her desk. It took time to locate the key, hidden behind a loose floorboard, but when I finally opened the drawer, my heart skipped a beat. Inside were several yellowed manuscripts, covered in my grandmother's intricate handwriting. They appeared ancient, fragile, as if they might disintegrate at the slightest touch. I carefully unfolded the first one, attempting to decipher the strange symbols and diagrams. There were passages written in English, but much of it was incomprehensible, like some coded language only she understood. The writings described a hidden chamber, concealed beneath the manor. A buried crypt, as she called it, that had been sealed for generations. My blood ran cold as I continued reading. realizing this was no ordinary crypt. According to the manuscripts, it was a sacred space, a shrine to something far older than any human civilization. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. My grandmother had been involved in some dark, esoteric practices, things that shouldn't exist beyond nightmares. But the curiosity was irresistible. There was something about her description, a sense of urgency, almost a plea for discovery. It was as if she wanted me to find it, to continue the quest she had initiated. I spent the following days searching the manor thoroughly, looking for any indication of the entrance to this hidden crypt. The manuscripts provided vague clues, mentioning certain architectural peculiarities and cryptic phrases like the raven's flight and the eye beneath the hearth. It was on the fourth night that I finally discovered it. In the grand hall, beneath an elaborate carpet that had been there for generations, I found a trapdoor. It was small, nearly invisible, but it perfectly matched the descriptions from the manuscripts. My hands trembled as I lifted the old, iron ring and pulled the door open. A foul, musty odor wafted up from the darkness below, and I recoiled, stepping back momentarily to collect myself. There was a ladder descending into the abyss, and without allowing myself time to reconsider, I climbed down. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and the silence was overwhelming, interrupted only by the occasional drip of water echoing in the distance. At the bottom, I found myself in a narrow stone corridor. The walls were damp, covered in moss and strange markings that I couldn't interpret. But I knew I could sense that I was getting closer. The manuscripts had mentioned a ritual, a ceremony to open the crypt. I didn't know what that involved, but as I ventured deeper into the underground labyrinth, I began to notice subtle clues. Remnants of old altars, symbols carved into the stone, and what appeared to be ancient offerings left to decompose. The narrow stone corridor seemed endless, its oppressive silence broken only by the faint drip of moisture seeping from the ceiling. My flashlight beam flickered, and I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me, as if the very earth above was watching, waiting for me to retreat. But I couldn't. I was too deeply entrenched now, too immersed in the madness my grandmother had left behind. After what felt like hours of walking, the tunnel widened into a small chamber, its walls adorned with ancient carvings that glistened with dampness. At the center of the room was what could only be described as an altar, though its twisted, inhuman design defied any sense of sanctity. The stone was cold and black, etched with symbols that pained my eyes if I gazed too long. Strange relics, bones, feathers, and objects I couldn't identify were scattered across its surface, as though left as offerings to some unseen deity. And then I saw it, another manuscript, carefully placed at the base of the altar, as though awaiting my arrival. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the old paper crinkling beneath my fingers. The writing was hurried, frantic. It was my grandmother's hand, but the words were barely coherent, a mixture of English and strange phrases in languages I couldn't recognize. The crypt, the raven, they are watching. The last line chilled me to the bone. I have seen them. They are beneath us. I stood paralyzed, the weight of my grandmother's words sinking in. She had known. She had been here in this very place, confronting whatever terrible knowledge had driven her to madness. And now I was standing where she had stood, on the verge of a truth too terrible to comprehend. The ground beneath me rumbled, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that sent shivers up my spine. I backed away from the altar, my mind racing. The manuscripts had mentioned something about a ritual, but I didn't know what I had done to trigger it. And then I saw it. On the far wall of the chamber, a section of the stone began to shift. Slowly, painfully, it slid aside, revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the earth. The darkness beyond was absolute, impenetrable, but I knew there was no turning back. I had to know. I had to understand what had consumed my grandmother and what lay beneath the manor. The passage was narrow and suffocating, the walls so close I could feel the cold stone brushing against my arms as I moved forward. The air grew colder, heavier, and the feeling of being watched intensified with every step. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, pulsating with some ancient, malevolent energy. I descended further, deeper into the bowels of the earth, my mind racing with questions. Who were these ancient beings my grandmother had written about? And what was their connection to our family? The manuscripts had hinted at something terrible, something beyond human comprehension, but they hadn't prepared me for the reality of it. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger this time, but far more disturbing. The walls were lined with more of the strange carvings, but these were different, more detailed. They depicted grotesque creatures, beings with too many eyes, too many limbs, engaged in horrific rituals. At the center of the room was a pit, and from it emanated a faint, unnatural glow. I approached the pit, my heart pounding in my chest. The light seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, drawing me closer, beckoning me to look. And so I did. What I saw at the bottom of that pit defied explanation. It was a vast, writhing mass, shifting and undulating as though it were alive. But it wasn't just a creature, it was many creatures, all tangled together in a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and tendrils. Their forms were ever-changing, impossible to define, and yet there was something horribly familiar about them. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. I could feel their hunger. And then the whispering began. At first it was barely audible, like the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. But as I stood there, frozen in place, the voices grew louder, more insistent. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. They wanted me to join them. I stumbled back from the pit, my mind reeling. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing thicker, suffocating. I had to get out. I had to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to leave, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I awoke, I was no longer in the chamber. I was lying on cold, damp stone, and the air around me was thick with the stench of decay. My body ached and my head throbbed with pain, but the worst part was the silence. The whispering was gone, replaced by a void so complete it felt like the world itself had vanished. I struggled to my feet, my legs unsteady, and looked around. I was in another part of the underground complex, but this one was different. The walls were smooth, polished, and the ceiling was far higher than in the previous chambers. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room stood a figure, a woman, or what used to be a woman. Her back was to me, but I could see the tattered remains of a dress clinging to her skeletal frame. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair hung in thin, matted strands. She didn't move, didn't react to my presence. But I knew who it was. It was my grandmother. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could hear her whispering, her voice barely audible but unmistakable. She was repeating the same phrase over and over, in a language I couldn't understand. When I was just a few feet away, she turned to face me. Her eyes, if they could still be called eyes, were black, empty voids, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Her skin was stretched tight over her skull, and her bones jutted out at unnatural angles. But it was her. It was my grandmother. And then she spoke. And the truth, it was never meant for us. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. What had happened to her? What had she become? Before I could react, the ground began to shake, and the walls of the chamber started to crumble. The air grew thick with dust, and I could hear the sound of something massive moving beneath the earth. The creatures in the pit, they were coming. The walls continued to tremble, dust falling in thick clouds around me as I struggled to stay on my feet. My grandmother, if that's what she truly was, stood motionless, staring at me with those hollow, empty eyes. But I had no time to contemplate what had become of her. The earth was shifting beneath us, and the pit, the creatures, were getting closer. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. I could feel it like an invisible force pressing down on me. I had to escape, but the passageway through which I'd entered was now blocked by fallen stones, trapping me in the chamber with whatever my grandmother had become. I looked around, desperately searching for another way out. The chamber seemed to stretch on forever, its walls lined with more of those impossible carvings, creatures and symbols that made my stomach churn. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, half hidden behind a crumbling wall, was a narrow staircase leading downward. Without hesitation, I ran toward it, my heart racing. The ground beneath me shook with every step, and the sound of something massive, something alive, echoed from below. I didn't know where the staircase led, but anywhere was better than here. The stairs were steep and uneven, carved from the same cold, black stone as the altar above. They descended deeper and deeper, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense, as though the very architecture of this place defied the laws of nature. The air grew colder, and I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on me from all sides. Finally, the stairs opened up into another chamber, much smaller than the one above. The walls here were smoother, polished to a sheen that reflected the dim light emanating from the strange symbols etched into the floor. In the center of the room stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in intricate carvings of avian figures and otherworldly beings. And then I saw it, the key. It was embedded in the door, a strange, twisted object made of metal that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Without thinking, I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the key, I felt a jolt of energy shoot through my body, as though the very air around me had come alive. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. And then, with a low, grinding sound, the stone door began to open. Behind it was darkness, an abyss so deep that even the light from the glowing symbols couldn't penetrate it. But there was something else, too. A sound, faint at first but growing louder with every passing second. A low, rhythmic chanting, like the voices of 1,000 souls, all speaking in unison. I stepped closer to the door, peering into the void. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, as though it was calling to me, beckoning me to step through. And against my better judgment, I did. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into total darkness. The chanting continued, echoing through the void, and I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, as though I were standing on the back of some enormous, slumbering beast. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling, and when I finally managed to turn it on, the beam barely cut through the thick, oppressive darkness. I could see only a few feet in front of me, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The walls of the tunnel were alive. They pulsed and writhed as though made of living flesh, and from them protruded hundreds, no, thousands of eyes, all watching me, unblinking. The chanting grew louder, more frantic, and I could feel the eyes boring into my soul, judging me, weighing me. I wanted to run, to turn back, but there was no way out. The door was gone, and the tunnel stretched on into infinity. I had no choice but to move forward, deeper into the heart of whatever nightmare my grandmother had uncovered. As I walked, the ground beneath me grew softer, more pliable, as though I were walking on the flesh of some enormous creature. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the chanting became a deafening roar, shaking the very walls of the tunnel. And then, without warning, the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. The sight that greeted me was beyond anything I could have imagined. The cavern was enormous, its walls lined with towering pillars of black stone, each one etched with more of those strange, otherworldly symbols. At the center of the cavern was a massive pool of black, viscous liquid, and above it hovered something. It was impossible to describe, its form shifting and changing with every passing second. At times it appeared humanoid, but then it would twist and contort into something far more grotesque, with too many limbs, too many eyes. It was as though it was made of the very fabric of nightmares. And then it spoke, not in words but in thoughts, thoughts that burrowed into my mind like parasites, planting themselves deep in my subconscious. "We have been waiting for you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This thing, it was what my grandmother had found. It was what had driven her mad. And now it had me. "You are the last of your kind," it continued, its voice echoing in my mind. "The last of the bloodline. Your fate was sealed long before you were born." The ground beneath me began to tremble, and I could feel the walls of the cavern closing in. The creature's form twisted and writhed, its many eyes watching me, judging me. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, trapped in the grip of something far older, far more powerful than I could ever comprehend. And then I saw it, the same symbol that had been etched into the manuscripts, the same symbol that had haunted my dreams since I'd found my grandmother's drawer. It was carved into the floor beneath the creature, glowing with an unnatural light. The chanting grew louder, more frantic, and I could feel the weight of the creature's presence bearing down on me. I was nothing to it, just a pawn in some ancient game that I couldn't begin to understand. "It is time," the creature whispered, its voice like the rustling of countless wings. "Join us." The ground beneath me cracked, and I felt myself falling, plunging into the black, viscous pool below. The liquid was cold, suffocating, and I could feel it wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. And then everything went black. When I awoke, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The deafening roar of the chanting voices, the writhing shapes gone. I was back in my grandmother's study, lying sprawled on the floor, the manuscripts scattered around me like fallen leaves. For a brief moment, it felt as though I had been returned to reality, as though the nightmare had been just that, an illusion. But then I felt it. The weight of the knowledge. The realization that what I had seen was not some hallucination or fevered dream, but the truth, the terrifying truth that had been buried beneath this manor for generations. I struggled to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. The study looked just as it had when I'd first found the drawer, but something was different now. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. And I could still feel it, that presence, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting. The pit was real. The creatures were real. And they were coming for me. I glanced at the drawer, the manuscripts, and then at the door leading back to the hidden passage. The temptation to flee surged through me, to lock the door and walk away from this place forever. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The pit could not be sealed, not by me. I was the last of the bloodline, the last heir to a legacy I never wanted, and the creatures. They had chosen me for a reason. But why? What was it about my family, about my grandmother, that had tied us to this dark force? The words the creature had whispered echoed in my mind. "You are the last of your kind. Your fate was sealed long before you were born." Suddenly a thought struck me, a realization so chilling that I nearly collapsed under its weight. It wasn't just the creatures that were waiting for me. It wasn't just about their escape, their return. It was about something far worse. I was meant to take her place. My grandmother hadn't just been researching these beings, she had been working with them, perhaps even serving them. The strange rituals, the carvings, the pit, it all pointed to one thing, a pact. A pact that had kept these ancient entities at bay, hidden beneath the earth, slumbering until the time was right. And now, with my grandmother gone, they needed a new conduit. A new connection to the world above. That was why I had been chosen, not to fight them, not to escape them, but to become their servant. Just as my grandmother had been. The thought made me recoil in horror, but deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. The bloodline, the knowledge, it had been passed down to me, and with it came the responsibility to keep the pact alive, to ensure that these creatures remained trapped beneath the earth. But how? How could I possibly do that? I looked around the room again, searching for something, anything that could give me a clue. The manuscripts, the strange symbols, the carvings, they had to hold the answer. Somewhere in my grandmother's research, there had to be a way to strengthen the seal, to prevent the creatures from rising again. But then another question crept into my mind. What if that was never the plan? What if the pact had never been about containment? What if it had always been about release? What if my grandmother had been working to bring them back, to awaken them fully, and my role, my purpose, was to finish what she had started? My heart raced as I considered the possibility. Everything I had seen, everything I had experienced, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. I was not just the last of the bloodline. I was the key. The symbols, the pit, the creatures, they had been waiting for me, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. And now that I was here, now that I had uncovered the truth, there was no turning back. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I had a choice to make: seal the pit forever, if that was even possible, or complete the ritual, as my grandmother had intended, and let the creatures rise. But as I stood there, staring at the manuscripts, I realized something else. The creatures were not the only danger. There was something far worse lurking beneath the surface, something even the creatures feared. I could feel it pulling at the edges of my consciousness, whispering to me in a language I could barely comprehend. The pit wasn't just a prison. It was a door, and I was standing on the threshold, the key in my hand. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the full weight of my predicament settled in. I was not ready for this. I didn't know how to stop what was coming, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The power, the pull of that ancient force, it was intoxicating. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood. I was connected to it in ways I didn't understand. But then I remembered my grandmother's eyes, the empty, hollow stare that had greeted me in the cavern. That was my fate if I gave in. That was what awaited me if I followed the path laid out for me. I turned toward the door, my mind made up. I didn't know how, but I was going to stop this. I would find a way to seal the pit, to break the cycle, to end the bloodline if I had to. But as I reached for the door, I felt something cold wrap around my wrist. I looked down and saw the symbol from the manuscripts glowing faintly on my skin, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The pact had already been made, and there was no escape. I awoke once more in that same dimly illuminated chamber. The walls were scarcely visible, engulfed by the overwhelming darkness that seemed to press in on me with each breath. A feeble flicker from a candle resting on a weathered oak table cast elongated, dancing shadows across the wooden floor, creating the illusion of motion, though I was certain I was alone. At least I desperately hoped I was. This was the third time this week I had found myself here, a hauntingly familiar space, yet one I could not recall ever consciously entering. It visited me in my slumber, uninvited, always identical. The room, the shadows, and that faint melodic humming, barely perceptible but persistent, like distant waves crashing against the cliffs beyond Ravenwood Manor. Every detail so remarkably vivid, so undeniably real, that upon waking, I frequently questioned whether I had truly escaped this place or merely awakened into another dream. Tonight was no exception. The air felt dense, as though saturated with some unseen presence, and my breathing came in shallow gasps as I attempted to gather my thoughts. The room offered little, minimal furnishings, no windows, no visible exits. Just the flickering candle and the endless shadows surrounding me. I compelled myself to move, to investigate. Each step felt like an eternity, as though the floorboards beneath me opposed my progress, slowing my movements to a crawl. But I persisted, if only to escape the suffocating sense of confinement. As I reached the farthest wall, my fingertips brushed against its cold, uneven surface. For a fleeting moment I thought I heard something, a faint murmur, too soft to discern clearly, but it sent shivers down my spine. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the whisper ceased. The room was silent once more, save for the persistent humming. I turned around, expecting the shadows to lunge at me, but nothing stirred. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was nowhere to flee. No escape. I wasn't certain how long I had been there. Time seemed meaningless in this place, but just as my legs began to weaken and my thoughts grew hazy, I felt it. A pull. Deep within my consciousness, a force drawing me toward something, somewhere. I couldn't resist. The sensation was too powerful, too urgent. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was no longer in the room. I was elsewhere. I found myself standing in a vast, barren coastline, beneath a sky that was neither dawn nor dusk. The horizon stretched endlessly, with sharp, craggy cliffs in the distance, their edges disappearing into a veil of swirling mist. The air here was different, saltier, lighter, though a strange, metallic flavor lingered on my tongue. Beneath my feet, the ground was not sand or soil, but something solid and smooth, like polished marble. It was engraved with intricate patterns, spirals, ancient runes, and shapes that defied comprehension, twisting and turning in on themselves, as if mocking my understanding of reality. Each step I took echoed loudly, yet there was no sound around me. No wind, no seabirds, no signs of life. In the distance, a figure stood motionless, its back turned toward me. My pulse quickened as I realized I wasn't alone. The figure was adorned in a long navy cloak, the fabric shimmering faintly in the twilight or lack thereof. I couldn't see their face, but something about their presence disturbed me profoundly. It was as if they had been expecting me. Driven by an invisible force, I moved toward the figure. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself was attempting to pull me down. Yet I continued, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and dread. I had to know who or what this figure was. When I was within a few feet, the figure slowly turned to face me. I froze. There was no face beneath the hood, only a swirling vortex of mist, deeper than the fog that had haunted me in the room. And yet I could feel its gaze upon me, observing, waiting. "You've journeyed far," the figure said, though its voice was not heard but felt, reverberating inside my skull. "But this is not the conclusion. You have merely begun to perceive." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words emerged. My throat constricted as the void seemed to advance closer, threatening to envelop me. Suddenly the ground beneath me shifted. The patterns engraved into the marble began to glow faintly, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. I stumbled backward, trying to regain my balance, but the ground gave way beneath me, and I fell. I fell for what seemed like an eternity, down through layers of reality, each one less tangible than the last. Colors, sounds, and shapes merged together as I plummeted deeper and deeper into the abyss. And then with a jolt, I landed. I was back in the room. The same chamber I had started in, with its flickering candle and oppressive darkness. But something was different now. I wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, concealed in the shadows, was a figure. Not the faceless one from the coastline, but something else. Its form was indistinct, shifting and morphing in the darkness, as if it was not entirely of this world. My heart raced as I realized it was watching me, its eyes, if they were eyes, glowing faintly in the gloom. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then it spoke. "Do you understand what you are?" The voice was raspy, like old parchment being unfurled. "Do you comprehend where you are?" I tried to speak, but again, no words came. My body felt leaden, paralyzed by the weight of the dream, or was it reality? The figure shifted, its form becoming clearer as it stepped into the faint light. It was human, or at least it had been once. Its skin was ashen and stretched tightly over its bones, its eyes sunken and hollow, filled with a cold, merciless intelligence. "You believe this is a dream," it said, a cruel smile twisting its lips. "But dreams and reality, they are one and the same. You have only scratched the surface of what lies beneath." I shook my head, attempting to deny the words, but deep down, I knew there was truth in them. This place, this nightmare, it felt too real, too vivid to be dismissed as a mere dream. But if this was real, what did that mean for me? What did it mean for the world I thought I had left behind? "You are near," the figure continued, its voice growing softer, more insidious. "Nearer than you realize. But to truly see, to truly understand, you must venture deeper. Deeper." The word echoed in my mind, pulling me further into the abyss of my own thoughts. I wanted to escape, to wake up, but I couldn't. Something was holding me here, something stronger than fear or logic. And then the ground shifted again. The walls of the room began to crumble, revealing a staircase leading down, deep into the earth. I knew instinctively that this was what the figure had meant. This was where I needed to go. But was it a dream? Or was this the real world disintegrating around me? I stood frozen at the top of the staircase, staring down into the abyss below. The darkness was impenetrable, consuming the faint light from the crumbling room behind me. Each step down felt like it was pulling me deeper into something unknown, something far more ancient than I could comprehend. My mind raced with questions, but no answers came. All I knew was that the figure, the entity, was right. I had to go deeper. As I descended, the air grew colder, heavier. My breath turned shallow as a damp, earthy scent filled my lungs. It was as if the very air was seeping out of the walls, thick with age and the weight of forgotten memories. The stone beneath my feet was slick with moisture, and every step echoed with a hollow thud that reverberated through the tunnels like the pulse of some hidden, monstrous entity. I lost track of time, if time even had meaning here. The stairwell spiraled endlessly downward, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. It felt as though I was descending not into the earth, but into the depths of my own subconscious, where reality itself twisted and warped with every step. But still I pressed on. Finally, I reached the bottom. The stairwell opened into a vast cavern, illuminated by an eerie, bluish glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Strange patterns, similar to the ones I had seen before, were etched into the stone, glowing faintly as if they were alive. The symbols were ancient, older than any language I knew, yet they stirred something deep within me, an instinctual recognition, as though some part of me had always known them. At the far end of the cavern stood a massive, weathered door, adorned with intricate carvings of winged creatures, half human, half bird, locked in eternal, twisted poses. Their faces were frozen in expressions of agony, as if they had been screaming for millennia. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. The door seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if it were alive, waiting for me. I felt the weight of the choice before me. I could turn back, retrace my steps, escape this nightmare. But something inside me refused. There was no going back now. I had to know. I had to understand. I reached out and touched the door. The cold stone stung my fingers, but I pressed harder. With a low, grating sound, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. The air inside was thick and oppressive, filled with the scent of salt and something far worse, something ancient, something alive. I hesitated only a moment before stepping through the threshold, the door closing behind me with a final, resonant thud. The passage was lined with strange, pulsating tendrils, like seaweed swaying in an invisible current, pulsing with an eerie light that cast flickering shadows around me. As I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath my feet. I stumbled, catching myself on the cold stone wall, my heart racing. The air grew heavier, more oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, almost liquid, as though the very atmosphere was conspiring against me. That's when I saw it. At the end of the passage, the walls opened into a small, circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, covered in thick, writhing seaweed. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in time with the beating of my own heart, faster and faster, until I thought I might lose consciousness. On the pedestal lay an ancient manuscript, its parchment cover cracked and worn with age. Symbols I could barely comprehend were etched into its surface, and the pages inside seemed to shimmer with a life of their own. My hands trembled as I reached for the manuscript, but something stopped me, an overwhelming sense of dread, as if touching the manuscript would seal my fate. "You're almost there," a voice whispered, barely audible, echoing through the chamber. It wasn't the same voice as before. This one was colder, more insidious, dripping with malice. "You've come so far. Don't stop now." I hesitated, my mind reeling. Was this still a dream? Or had I crossed some invisible threshold into something far worse? The boundaries between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition, and I no longer knew what was real. But the voice was right. I had come too far to stop now. My fingers brushed the surface of the manuscript. The moment they made contact, a searing pain shot through my hand, up my arm, and into my mind. I screamed, stumbling backward, but the pain didn't stop. It was as if the manuscript had latched onto my very soul, pulling me deeper into its dark, twisted embrace. Visions flooded my mind, images of ancient rituals, grotesque beings rising from the depths of the ocean, dark skies filled with swirling, malevolent forces. And at the center of it all I saw myself, or at least a version of me, a twisted, distorted reflection, standing before the same pedestal, the same manuscript, with the same mark burned into my hand. I looked down, my heart pounding in my chest. On my palm the mark was there, a strange, circular symbol, glowing faintly, as though it had been seared into my flesh. The mark pulsed on my hand, a deep, rhythmic throb that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. I stumbled away from the pedestal, my legs weak, barely holding me up. The chamber felt smaller now, the air denser, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. But it wasn't the physical space that was suffocating me. It was the realization that something far more profound had just happened. The visions, the pain, the mark. It wasn't just a dream. Something had changed, something in me, or perhaps something around me. I stared at the mark again, tracing its lines with my trembling fingers. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, and yet it felt strangely familiar, like I had seen it in the deepest corners of my mind, or perhaps in my nightmares. The voice returned, softer this time, as if it were speaking directly into my mind. "You are the last, the final heir to a legacy older than this world itself. You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. My thoughts were spiraling, a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and an unsettling clarity that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. "To finish what was started long ago," the voice replied, its tone almost soothing. "To bring forth the awakening." I recoiled at the word, my heart pounding in my chest. The awakening. The same words I had seen in the ancient manuscripts, the same phrase whispered by the figure in Ravenwood Manor. I had no idea what it truly meant, but every fiber of my being screamed that it was something unspeakably terrible. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place before it consumed me entirely. But the moment I turned to flee, the chamber seemed to shift around me, twisting and warping like the corridors of my mind. The walls pulsed with the same eerie light, the the symbols glowing brighter as if feeding off my fear. The exit, once clearly visible, was now lost in a maze of shifting shadows. I was trapped. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and from the walls, the tendrils that had seemed dormant began to writhe and twist, slowly creeping toward me like the limbs of some ancient beast. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my eyes darting around the room for any possible escape. But there was none. The tendrils closed in, and just as one of them reached out to wrap around my ankle, I felt a sudden rush of air, a cold, biting wind that seemed to emanate from within the very walls themselves. The tendrils froze, retreating as if they had been struck by some unseen force. And then the floor beneath me gave way. I fell, plunging into the darkness below. The wind roared in my ears, and for a brief moment I felt weightless, suspended in the void. My mind spun with terror, the world around me dissolving into a blur of shadows and flickering light. When I finally hit the ground, the impact knocked the breath from my lungs, and I lay there, gasping for air. My body ached, my mind reeling from the fall, but as I opened my eyes, I realized I was no longer in the cavern. I was back in my grandmother's study at Ravenwood Manor. The room was exactly as I had left it, the cluttered desk, the shelves lined with old books, the faint smell of dust and sea salt. But something was different. The air was heavier, thick with a sense of foreboding, as though the very atmosphere had changed in my absence. I stood up, my legs shaky, and looked around. The manuscript, the ancient parchment from the pedestal, was now sitting on the desk in front of me, its pages fluttering as if moved by an unseen hand. The mark on my palm glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the flickering pages. I reached out to close the manuscript, but as my fingers brushed the cover, a wave of nausea washed over me. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt and sway around me, as if reality itself was unraveling at the seams. And then I heard the voice again. "You cannot escape," it whispered, no longer cold but soft, almost inviting. "This is your fate." I staggered backward, clutching my head as the world around me twisted and warped, the walls of the study melting into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. My heart raced, my mind frantically trying to make sense of what was happening, but the more I fought, the more the world crumbled around me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. I found myself standing in the middle of a vast, featureless landscape, an endless expanse of mist, stretching out in every direction. There was no sky, no horizon, only the oppressive emptiness that seemed to press in on me from all sides. "Where am I?" I muttered, my voice echoing in the void. The voice responded, no longer a whisper, but a calm, steady presence in my mind. "You are where you have always been. This is the world you have created." I shook my head, the confusion and fear giving way to a growing sense of dread. "What do you mean? I didn't create this." "Oh, but you did," the voice replied, its tone almost gentle. "This is your mind, your dream, your reality. You are the architect of your own fate." The weight of the words settled over me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me with unbearable force. Everything Ravenwood Manor, the dreams, the descent into the cavern, it had all been me. My mind, my creation, my nightmare. I fell to my knees, the truth sinking in. This was my world. This was my doing. And now I was trapped in it. "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why me?" "Because you are the last," the voice replied. "The final heir to the legacy. The one who will bring forth the awakening." I looked down at my hand, the mark glowing brighter than ever. The choice, the fate, had been sealed from the moment I had set foot in Ravenwood Manor. And now there was no turning back. As the realization settled over me, I felt a strange calm wash over me, a quiet acceptance of the inevitable. I had been chosen not by some external force, but by my own mind, my own creation. And as I looked up into the endless expanse of mist, I saw it, the symbol etched into the sky, glowing with the same light as the mark on my hand. The final piece of the puzzle. The choice had been made. But what that choice was, only the darkness knew. The symbol in the sky pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm, each beat drawing me deeper into its strange, ethereal glow. It was as if the world around me was fading, melting into the vast expanse of mist, leaving only the mark on my hand and the symbol above as anchors to reality. I stood there frozen, my mind racing through the possibilities. Could it all truly be my creation? Was I the architect of this strange, nightmarish world? Or was this merely the final deception of forces far older and more sinister than I could comprehend? The voice spoke again, soft but insistent. There is no escaping the truth, no running from what you are. You were always destined to bring about the awakening. The choice was never truly yours. I wanted to scream, to deny everything, but the words caught in my throat. Deep down, I knew the voice was right. Every step I had taken, every twist and turn, had led me to this moment. And now, standing on the edge of madness, I realized there was no way back. I glanced down at the mark on my palm, now glowing with a fierce intensity. It felt alive, as if it had its own pulse, its own will. It was a part of me now, woven into the very fabric of my being. But something shifted within me, a flicker of resistance, a quiet defiance that had been buried beneath the weight of fear and confusion. Perhaps the choice wasn't as inevitable as the voice claimed. Perhaps in this strange realm of dreams and shadows, I still had the power to shape my own fate. What if I refuse? I asked, my voice stronger now, more certain. There was a pause, a ripple in the stillness of the void, as if the voice itself was taken aback by the question. You cannot refuse, it replied, its tone colder now, more insistent. The awakening is inevitable. It has been set in motion for centuries, and you are merely the final piece. To deny it is to deny your very existence. The words echoed in my mind, heavy with a truth I didn't want to accept. But even as the voice spoke, that flicker of defiance grew stronger, a spark of rebellion against the fate that had been forced upon me. I looked up at the symbol in the sky, its lines and angles shifting, twisting in ways that defied all logic and reason. It was calling to me, urging me to submit, to fulfill the role I had been chosen for. But something in me resisted, something deep and primal that refused to bend to the will of forces I couldn't understand. I took a step forward toward the symbol, feeling its pull like a current dragging me closer. But as I moved, the mark on my hand burned hotter, and for the first time I felt something else, a second presence, faint but unmistakable, pushing against the pull of the symbol. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a quiet, insistent force buried deep within me that fought against the destiny the voice had laid out. You are stronger than you realize, the second voice whispered, so soft it was barely audible. This is your world, your creation. The choice was always yours. I froze, caught between the two forces, one pulling me toward the awakening, the other urging me to resist. The air around me grew thick with tension, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. I glanced down at my hand once more, the mark burning brightly now, its light casting long shadows across the featureless landscape. And then in the periphery of my vision I saw it, a faint outline, a shape hidden in the endless mist. A door. It was small, unassuming, barely visible against the backdrop of the void. But it was there, a possibility, a way out. The voice of the awakening hissed in my mind, its tone turning sharp, almost desperate. There is no escape. You cannot run from what you are. But the second presence, quieter but more certain, urged me forward. This is your world. You control it. The door has always been there, waiting for you to see it. I took a step toward the door, the pull of the symbol growing stronger with each movement. The mark on my hand burned fiercely now, as if trying to anchor me in place, to keep me from breaking free. But the closer I got to the door, the more the second presence surged within me, filling me with a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grasped the handle of the door. The moment my fingers made contact, the void around me began to shift and warp, the symbol in the sky flickering, fading as if it were losing its grip on reality. The voice of the awakening screamed in my mind, a cacophony of anger and fear. "You cannot defy us. You are ours." But I pushed open the door. The moment the door swung open, a rush of air hit me, cold and sharp, and the world around me dissolved into darkness. For a moment I was falling again, tumbling through the void, my mind spinning with the weight of what I had just done. And then I was back. I found myself standing in the center of my grandmother's study at Ravenwood Manor once more, the familiar scent of old books and sea salt filling the air. The mark on my hand was gone, and the room was still, as if nothing had ever happened. But something was different. I glanced around, my heart pounding, half expecting the walls to melt or the floor to give way. But everything remained as it was, the desk, the shelves, the window casting a faint glow of moonlight into the room. Had it all been a dream? A nightmare born from the depths of my mind? I didn't know. But as I looked down at my hand, I saw it, faint but unmistakable, the outline of the symbol, barely visible, like a scar that had faded with time but never truly disappeared. The choice had been made, and the world I had created, the maze of visions and shadows, was still out there, waiting. The rain poured relentlessly, drenching the coastal village of Mornhaven. Alexandra Thorne stood beneath the weathered stone archway leading to the local lighthouse, clutching a salt-stained leather journal in her trembling hands. The journal had belonged to her grandmother, a woman she hardly remembered, but whose name still evoked whispers among the village's oldest residents. It had all begun 10 days ago when Alexandra inherited Ravenwood Manor, her grandmother's seaside estate perched on the cliffs overlooking Mornhaven. The mansion had remained sealed since her grandmother's unexplained disappearance decades earlier. The villagers spoke of eerie occurrences there, but Alexandra had dismissed their stories as local folklore. Yet the discovery of the journal in a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard in her grandmother's study awakened something inexplicable within her. The journal contained cryptic illustrations and fragmented text. One phrase, however, appeared repeatedly throughout the aged pages. "Beware the ancients of the deep. They wait in the beacon of endless vigilance." Alexandra's pulse quickened as she gazed up at the lighthouse. Through the curtain of rain, the ancient structure loomed against the turbulent sky, its beacon dark for decades. A strange tension hung in the air, thick and palpable despite the downpour. She hesitated at the entrance, but something within her, something beyond rational thought, compelled her to unlock the heavy wooden door. It swung inward with a low, mournful groan. As Alexandra stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The rainfall seemed to fade to a distant murmur, as if muffled by an unseen barrier, and the air inside swirled with a strange mist that curled around the spiral staircase, almost sentient in its movements. The chill penetrated her raincoat, but she advanced forward, drawn by an inexplicable force toward the heart of the lighthouse. The journal had referenced a particular stone slab, one that bore the same emblem Alexandra had discovered etched into her palm the night after finding the book. It wasn't a birthmark or tattoo. It had materialized overnight, burned into her skin in an archaic pattern. Her heart raced at the memory. She climbed the winding staircase, each step taking her higher into the abandoned lighthouse. The wooden steps creaked beneath her weight, telling tales of neglect and forgotten purpose. Names and legacies lost to time, much like her own family's mysterious past. But the journal had been specific, Seek the northern stone at the keeper's summit, for beneath lies the truth. Alexandra's breath caught as she reached the lantern room. The massive lens stood dormant, its glass surfaces coated with years of salt and grime. But her attention was drawn to the floor, where a large, circular stone slab dominated the center of the room. Upon it was carved the unmistakable emblem, her emblem. She knelt beside it, tracing her fingers along the weathered engravings, and as she did, the floor beneath her vibrated with energy. The stone shifted. With a grinding sound, the slab rotated to reveal a hidden staircase, spiraling down into darkness. Alexandra stood frozen, paralyzed by a momentary surge of fear. Her logical mind urged retreat, but another part, something deeper and more primal, beckoned her downward. She took the first step. The staircase descended far below what Alexandra had anticipated. The stone walls were slick with sea spray and condensation, and the air grew heavier, saltier with each step. The faint light from the lantern room above gradually faded, leaving only the pale blue glow emanating from cracks in the walls. She felt the weight of the unknown bearing down upon her, but her curiosity and the strange compulsion drove her onward. The journal had mentioned a place of endless vigilance. It spoke of ancient entities that dwelt beneath the waves, forgotten by time, waiting to resurface. Alexandra had initially dismissed these as the delusions of a troubled mind. But now, descending into the depths, she could no longer deny the preternatural sensation that something otherworldly stirred below. The stairway eventually opened into a vast, circular chamber carved directly into the bedrock beneath the lighthouse. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, etched deep into the stone and pulsing with a subtle, aquamarine luminescence. In the center of the room stood a weathered stone altar, encrusted with barnacles and sea growth, suggesting centuries of exposure to tidal forces. Behind it loomed an enormous curved doorway, sealed with thick, corroded chains that appeared forged from an unfamiliar metal with a greenish patina. Alexandra approached with caution, her heart hammering within her chest. As she neared the altar, a sudden wave of vertigo overwhelmed her. The symbols on the walls appeared to undulate like seaweed caught in a current. She stumbled backward, clutching her head, struggling to maintain her equilibrium. "Focus," she whispered to herself, breathing deeply. "It's just an illusion. It's just..." Before she could complete the thought, the ground beneath her trembled, and a deep, resonating sound echoed throughout the chamber. It wasn't a sound any human vocal cords could produce. It was something ancient, something oceanic. Her thoughts returned to the journal, to the warning hastily scribbled across its final page. "They sense your presence. They hear your heartbeat across the void." Alexandra looked frantically around, searching for the source of the sound. The walls seemed to constrict, and the shadows stretched longer, darker, until they resembled tentacles reaching across the floor. Her breathing grew rapid and shallow as panic took hold. But something within her, the same force that had guided her here, kept her rooted in place. She had to discover the truth about her grandmother, about her lineage, and about the secrets concealed beneath the lighthouse. Steeling herself, she approached the altar. Her fingers brushed its cold surface, barnacle-encrusted and slippery with sea moisture, and a sudden surge of energy coursed through her body. She gasped, staggering backward, but her gaze was drawn to something nestled among the marine growth, a small, bronze key, remarkably preserved despite the corrosive environment. Alexandra paused briefly before retrieving it. The key was unexpectedly warm to the touch, and as she held it, she experienced an inexplicable connection to it, as though it had been waiting specifically for her. Instinctively, she turned toward the massive chained doorway. The chain seemed to pulse, responding to her presence. Her hand trembled as she approached, but with the key firmly in her grasp, she felt a strange sense of purpose. She inserted the key into the ancient lock. It fit perfectly. With a resonant click that echoed throughout the chamber, the chains loosened and fell away, splashing into shallow pools of seawater on the floor. The stone door groaned as it slowly swung inward, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Alexandra hesitated. She understood that whatever lay beyond this threshold would irrevocably alter everything. But she had ventured too far to retreat now. Drawing a deep breath of the briny air, she stepped forward into the unknown. The passageway beyond was narrow, the air thick with the scent of salt water and something else, something primordial and unsettling. The walls were inscribed with more intricate carvings, but these differed from those in the outer chamber. They depicted detailed scenes of ritualistic offerings, of human figures bowing before massive, tentacled beings emerging from turbulent waters. Alexandra felt a chill course through her as she realized the creatures in the carvings seemed hauntingly familiar. The journal had mentioned them, the ancients. Primordial entities that had once ruled the oceans long before humanity's emergence. They had been banished, imprisoned in the deepest trenches of the sea, but their followers had endured, worshipping them in secret, awaiting their return. Alexandra's mind raced as she ventured deeper into the passage. Her grandmother had known about this. She had been involved somehow. And now it appeared Alexandra was being drawn into the same enigmatic legacy. But why? Why had her grandmother left her the journal, the key, the manor? What purpose lay behind it all? As these questions swirled in her mind, she noticed a peculiar sensation on her palm. Glancing down, she saw that the emblem, the symbol that had appeared on her skin, was glowing with a soft blue light. The same emblem adorned the walls of the passageway, the same symbol that marked the entrance to this forbidden place. It was as though the mark was guiding her, drawing her deeper into the earth, towards something she could not yet comprehend. Finally, the passage opened into another chamber, this one even larger than the first. At the far end stood an immense stone pedestal, partially submerged in a pool of seawater, upon which rested a large, ornate tome. The book was bound in what appeared to be the hide of some unknown sea creature, its cover iridescent and shifting in the dim light. Alexandra knew instinctively that this was the source of everything. The journal had spoken of the Codex Oceanum, an ancient text rumored to contain the secrets of the ancients. Alexandra approached the book, her heart pounding. The air around it seemed to vibrate with energy, and as she reached out to touch it, she experienced a surge of power unlike anything she had ever known. Her hand trembled as her fingertips grazed the cover. Suddenly, the chamber around her shifted. The walls appeared to ripple like the surface of disturbed water, and the air grew thick with the scent of brine. Alexandra stumbled backward, her vision blurring as the world around her distorted. She could hear whispers, faint and incomprehensible, growing louder with each passing moment. "You are the last." The voice resonated in her mind, deep and commanding. Alexandra turned in a circle, searching for its source, but saw nothing, only shadows, moving and shifting like creatures beneath the waves. "You are the vessel." The voice was closer now, as though it were speaking directly into her ear. She spun around again, her heart racing, but still found nothing. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. The journal had mentioned the voices, the whispers of the ancients, calling to their chosen. But Alexandra had never believed it. Not until now. Suddenly the emblem on her palm burned with an intense, cold fire, and she cried out in pain. She fell to her knees, clutching her wrist as the symbol seared deeper into her flesh, glowing brighter, until it was almost blinding. And then just as suddenly, the pain subsided. The chamber fell silent. Alexandra opened her eyes, gasping for breath. The emblem on her palm still glowed faintly, but the pain had vanished. She looked around, her vision gradually clearing. The chamber had returned to its previous state, if it had ever truly changed. But something was different. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady. The book remained on the pedestal, partially submerged in the pool, but the energy surrounding it had transformed. It no longer felt threatening, no longer felt as though it sought to consume her. Instead, it felt welcoming. Alexandra hesitated only momentarily before reaching out once more, her fingers brushing the strange, iridescent cover of the book. This time there was no overwhelming surge of energy, no sudden distortion of the chamber. The book seemed to be waiting for her, inviting her. She opened it carefully, the pages surprisingly dry despite their proximity to water. The text was unlike anything she had ever encountered, written in a script that seemed to flow and change like currents. Initially, she couldn't decipher the writing, but as she studied the pages, something remarkable began to happen. The symbols rearranged themselves, shifting into forms she could comprehend. It was as though the book itself was revealing its secrets to her, one page at a time. Her eyes scanned the text, and the more she read, the more rapidly her heart beat. The book described the ancients, their banishment, and the rituals that maintained their imprisonment. But it also spoke of something else, something far more terrifying. The vessel, the one destined to release them, to bring them back into the world. Alexandra's breath caught in her throat as she realized what the journal had been attempting to convey all along. The emblem on her palm, the strange pull that had led her here, it was all part of a design. She wasn't merely the last of her bloodline, she was the one destined to free the ancients from their eternal prison. Panic flooded through her. She slammed the book shut, stepping back as though mere proximity might consume her. Her thoughts scattered in all directions. Could this truly be her fate? Was she really meant to bring about the end of everything known? She examined the emblem on her palm, still glowing with a pale blue light. The weight of the revelation pressed upon her, threatening to crush her beneath it. She needed to escape. She needed to leave this place before it was too late. But as she turned to flee, the ground beneath her shuddered more violently than before. The chamber walls groaned, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the air, the same sound she had heard upon first entering the chamber. But this time it was nearer. Alexandra's heart raced as she turned, searching for the source. Her eyes were drawn to the stone doorway, now fully open, the chains lying broken in pools of seawater. And from the darkness beyond, something was emerging. A figure stepped into the light tall, draped in robes that appeared woven from seaweed and shells. Its face remained hidden within a deep hood, but Alexandra could feel its gaze upon her, cold and ancient. The figure moved with fluid grace, as though partially composed of water itself. "You have awakened them." The voice was deep yet flowing, and it seemed to echo in Alexandra's mind rather than through her ears. Alexandra retreated, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you mean?" "I didn't. The moment you entered this sanctuary, the moment you touched the codex, their slumber was disturbed. You are the one they have awaited." The figure drew closer, and Alexandra could now see more details, webbed hands extending from the sleeves of the robe, the faint glow of symbols etched into what little visible skin there was. It was one of the ancients' devotees, a servant who had waited centuries for this moment. Alexandra's thoughts raced. She had to prevent this. She couldn't allow these entities to return to the world. But how? The book, the key, the emblem. Everything pointed to her, but there had to be a way to stop the process. "You cannot oppose your destiny." The figure's voice was cold, final. "It is written in the tides, in the blood of your ancestors. You will complete the ritual, and they will rise once more." Alexandra shook her head, panic rising within her. "No, I won't do it. I can't." The figure paused, tilting its head slightly. "It is not a matter of choice. The ritual has already commenced. It is in motion, and nothing you do can halt it." Alexandra's heart pounded in her chest. The words felt like a sentence of doom. But then something clicked in her mind, a fragment from the journal, something her grandmother had written. The bonds that contain them are forged not of metal, but of will. Only the vessel can break them, and only the vessel can strengthen them. Alexandra looked down at the emblem on her palm, glowing steadily in the darkness. The key wasn't solely for releasing the ancients, it was also the means to keep them bound. Her grandmother had known. She had left the journal, the clues, the manner, all to guide Alexandra here to this moment. But was she prepared? Could she truly resist the pull of destiny? The power that now coursed through her veins. The ground trembled again, more violently than before. The air around her grew heavy with the same dark energy she had felt earlier, pressing upon her, threatening to overwhelm her completely. The robed figure took another step forward. It is time. Alexandra's mind raced, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She could feel the weight of the ancients pressing down upon her, the primordial, malevolent force that sought to break free from its prison. But somewhere deep inside her, a spark of resistance ignited. She wasn't ready to surrender. Without conscious thought, Alexandra raised her hand, the one bearing the glowing emblem, and directed it toward the stone doorway. The emblem blazed brilliantly, filling the chamber with an intense azure light. The robed figure recoiled, releasing a sound like waves crashing against cliffs as the light engulfed it. Alexandra felt the energy surging through her, more powerful than anything she had ever experienced. The codex, the altar, the chains, they were all connected to her, to the emblem. She possessed the power to halt this. With a cry of defiance, Alexandra focused all her will on the stone doorway, on the chains that had once bound the ancients. She could feel the force pushing against her, trying to break free, but she stood firm, refusing to yield. The chamber shook violently, the walls fracturing as seawater began to seep through, but Alexandra maintained her position. The light from the emblem grew brighter until it was almost unbearable. The robed figure wailed, its voice echoing throughout the chamber, but Alexandra remained steadfast. And then, with a final burst of energy, the chains reappeared, binding the stone door once more. The chamber fell silent. Alexandra collapsed to the ground, struggling for breath. The emblem on her palm still glowed faintly, but the intense light had dimmed. She had succeeded. She had prevented the ancients from returning. But as she lay there, exhausted and shaken, a new realization dawned on her. The emblem remained. It was still there, still connected to the ancient power that had brought her here. And as long as it remained, the threat of the ancients would never truly vanish. Alexandra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her destiny settle over her. She had won this confrontation, but the conflict was far from resolved. The world seemed unusually quiet. Ever since Alexandra had returned from the labyrinthine visions that had nearly consumed her, the air around Ravenwood Manor felt dense, charged with an invisible tension. She hadn't experienced any strange dreams for almost a week, at least none she could recall. But there were moments, fleeting yet disturbing, when reality appeared to shimmer and distort, as if her visions were bleeding into the waking world. It began with minor occurrences, shadows that persisted too long after dusk, voices that murmured just beyond comprehension, and most unsettling, the throbbing sensation from the emblem on her palm. What had once been a static mark of mysterious origin now pulsed rhythmically, as though it were alive, sensing something lurking beneath the surface. Alexandra had tried to dismiss what Marion had told her about the Tide Singers and the ancient forces connected to her family. She wanted to believe it was all merely a series of elaborate nightmares, the product of an overactive imagination triggered by inheriting her grandmother's seaside estate. But the emblem, the visions, and the shifting reality she experienced suggested something far more sinister. That night, despite her determined efforts to stay awake, sleep claimed Alexandra. As her consciousness drifted into the familiar void, she found herself once more standing in a world that defied all logic. The vast corridors of the vision maze had returned, but something was different this time. The air felt charged with anticipation, as if something or someone was waiting for her. She began to walk, her footsteps echoing through the empty passageways. The patterns that adorned the walls glowed faintly, casting elongated shadows that twisted and writhed as though they possessed a life of their own. It was then that she noticed the seal. A large, sleek figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes shimmering with an otherworldly light. The creature gazed at her, head slightly cocked, as if recognizing her from a long-forgotten memory. "Who are you?" Alexandra's voice reverberated in the vastness. The seal didn't respond verbally, but Alexandra felt a strange connection form between them. There was something familiar about the creature, something that tugged at the recesses of her mind. Without thinking, she reached out to touch its sleek fur, and the moment her fingers made contact, a wave of memories flooded her consciousness. This wasn't just a seal. She could sense it now. There was something far deeper behind those intelligent eyes. As they moved through the maze together, Alexandra found herself growing increasingly comfortable in the presence of the seal. It moved with purpose, guiding her down corridors and through doorways that seemed to open only for them. And with each step, the world around them grew more vivid, more tangible. Suddenly, the seal stopped. Alexandra followed its gaze to a mural on the wall, a depiction of ancient entities slumbering beneath the waves, their forms massive and grotesque. Her heart raced as she recognized the emblems on the entities' bodies. They matched the one etched into her palm. The seal, sensing her unease, pressed its head against her leg, offering unexpected comfort. Then, in a moment that startled Alexandra to her core, a voice, not her own, spoke in her mind. "They are not dead, only dreaming." Alexandra stumbled back, her eyes wide as she looked down at the seal. You can speak." The voice in her mind returned, calm and steady. "I am more than you perceive. I have always been with you." Alexandra's mind raced. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place, but it was overwhelming, too rapid. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. The seal stared up at her, and for the first time, Alexandra saw the truth in its eyes. This was no ordinary creature of the vision world. This was her aunt, her father's sister, who had vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances during a sailing expedition. "I am your guide," the seal said. "I have taken this form to help you understand the truth." Alexandra's heart pounded in her chest as the full weight of her aunt's words sank in. "The entities, the ones in the mural. They're real, aren't they?" The seal, her aunt, nodded. "They have slumbered for eons, buried deep beneath the ocean, beneath our family's coastal property. Their power has seeped into our bloodline in that emblem on your palm. It is a connection to them." Alexandra instinctively rubbed the emblem on her palm, feeling its pulse synchronized with her racing heartbeat. "But why me? Why now?" Her aunt's voice was gentle yet firm in her mind. "Because the time approaches. The entities are beginning to stir, and with them, the boundary between vision and reality is thinning. You are not the only one who bears the emblem, Alexandra. There are others, and if the entities fully awaken, the world as we know it will change forever." They ventured deeper into the maze, the atmosphere growing heavier, more oppressive. Alexandra's thoughts swirled with questions, but the weight of her aunt's words kept her grounded. If what she said was true, then their family was more than just a line of visionaries. They were the keepers of an ancient power, one that was tied to forces far beyond their comprehension. But there was still one mystery that lingered in Alexandra's mind, the origin of the emblem itself. "How did this happen to us?" she asked. "How did we become linked to these entities?" Her aunt's silence stretched longer than comfortable before she answered. No one knows with certainty. The emblem appears in every generation, but its origins are lost to time. Perhaps the entities chose us, or perhaps we were merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. The answer may lie with the entities themselves, but to ask them directly would be madness. Alexandra frowned. Why? Because to communicate with them in the waking world would shatter your sanity. They are too vast, too alien for our mortal minds to comprehend. The only place where you might find answers is here, in the vision. As they reached the heart of the maze, Alexandra saw it, a massive stone altar, covered in the same emblems as the mark on her palm. The altar seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, its surface slick with a strange, iridescent liquid that reflected both the light and the darkness of the vision world. Alexandra hesitated, her hand hovering over the stone, feeling the pull of the power within it. It was as if the altar was calling to her, beckoning her to make a choice, though what that choice entailed she couldn't yet say. The seal, her aunt, rested silently beside her, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Alexandra looked down at her, searching for answers in the seal's unwavering gaze. The entities are stirring, the seal said, its voice echoing in Alexandra's mind. They can feel your presence, Alexandra. They know you are here. Alexandra swallowed hard, her throat dry. What do they want? The seal tilted its head, as if considering the question. To wake, it said simply. They have slept for eons, dreaming their dark dreams beneath the waves. But now the boundaries between their world and ours are thinning, and soon they will break free. Alexandra felt a chill run down her spine. And what happens if they do? Her aunt's voice was soft, but filled with an underlying tension. The world will change, Alexandra. The entities will reshape it in their image, and everything we know will be twisted, altered beyond recognition. It will no longer be our world, but theirs. Alexandra's mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of what her aunt was saying. The entities, these ancient, slumbering beings, held the power to reshape reality itself, and the only thing standing between them and the waking world was her. The weight of the responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. But why me? She asked again, her voice barely more than a whisper. Why does it have to be me? The seal looked up at her, its eyes filled with a sadness that Alexandra hadn't noticed before. Because you bear the emblem, it said. You are connected to the entities in a way that no one else is. You have the power to stop them, or to set them free. Alexandra stared at the altar, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. The power within the stone seemed to hum in response to her thoughts, its pull growing stronger with every passing second. She knew deep down that the choice was hers to make. But what was the right choice? Alexandra took a deep breath, her hands still hovering over the altar. The emblem on her palm was burning now, the pain sharp and searing, as if the entities themselves were trying to reach out to her. She clenched her fist, trying to block out the pain, but it was no use. The emblem was alive, pulsing with the same energy that filled the altar. You are the key, the seal said, its voice barely audible in Alexandra's mind. The entities have chosen you to either open the door or keep it shut. But be warned, whichever choice you make, there will be consequences. Alexandra's heart pounded in her chest as she looked down at the emblem. It had always been a part of her, something she'd never fully understood. But now, standing in the heart of the maze, she realized that it was more than just a symbol. It was a bond, a link between her and the ancient entities that slumbered beneath the waves. And now it was up to her to decide whether that bond would be severed or strengthened. How do I stop them? She asked, her voice trembling with fear. The seal tilted its head, its eyes glowing softly in the darkness. The entities are bound by the vision, it said. As long as they remain in their slumber, their power is contained. But if they wake, the vision will become reality. Alexandra's mind raced, trying to make sense of what her aunt was telling her. The vision was the key. The entities were trapped within it, unable to fully manifest in the waking world. But if the boundaries between the vision and reality continued to blur, they would eventually break free. And if I wake them, Alexandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The seal didn't answer for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice was filled with a quiet sadness. Then the world as you know it will cease to exist. Alexandra stared at the altar, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she wanted to stop the entities from waking, to protect the world from their dark influence. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something her aunt wasn't telling her. "What are you not saying?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. The seal hesitated, its eyes narrowing slightly. "There is another way," it said slowly. "A way to control the entity's power without waking them. But it is dangerous, more dangerous than anything you have faced so far." Alexandra's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" The seal turned its gaze toward the altar, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "The entities are bound by the vision," it said. "But their power can be harnessed if you are strong enough to wield it." Alexandra felt a surge of hope. "You mean I can use their power without waking them?" The seal nodded, its expression serious. "Yes, but it will come at a cost." Alexandra swallowed hard. "What kind of cost?" The seal looked up at her, its eyes filled with an emotion that Alexandra couldn't quite place. "Your mind," it said simply. "To wield the entity's power, you must enter their dreams. And once you do, there is no guarantee that you will ever wake up." Alexandra's heart sank. The choice before her was more dangerous than she had imagined. She could stop the entities from waking, but only by risking her own sanity. Or she could let them sleep, but leave the world vulnerable to their eventual awakening. "How do I make this choice?" she asked, her voice trembling. The seal didn't answer. Instead, it moved closer to the altar, its eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. "The choice is yours, Alexandra," it said softly. "But remember, whatever you choose, you must be prepared to face the consequences." Alexandra stared at the altar, her mind racing. The power within it seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, calling to her, beckoning her to make a decision. She knew that once she touched the altar, there would be no turning back. Taking a deep breath, Alexandra reached out toward the altar, her hand trembling with fear and anticipation. The emblem on her palm burned with a fierce intensity, as if urging her forward. She hesitated for a moment, her mind filled with doubts. But then she remembered her aunt's words. The entities were stirring, and the boundaries between vision and reality were weakening. If she did nothing, the world would be lost. She had to act, even if it meant risking everything. With a final surge of determination, Alexandra placed her hand on the altar. The moment Alexandra's hand touched the altar, the world around her trembled. A shockwave of energy surged through her body, as if she had tapped into a current too powerful for any human mind to endure. She gasped, the air around her crackling with an otherworldly force, and her vision blurred as she was pulled deeper into the labyrinth of visions. The seal, the specter of her aunt, watched in silence as Alexandra was consumed by the power of the entities. Her form flickered, distorting between the familiar shape of the seal and something else, something far older, far more dangerous. Alexandra's mind teetered on the edge of collapse, and as the altar's energy flooded through her, she was suddenly no longer in control. She was falling. The world beneath her twisted and turned, and Alexandra found herself in a vast, cosmic expanse, the edges of her consciousness touching something ancient and infinite. Stars spun in an incomprehensible dance, and beneath her, far below, lay the endless void, the space where the entities slumbered. Alexandra heard their whispers, faint but growing louder with every passing second. Their voices clawed at her mind, tugging at her thoughts, filling her soul with dread and wonder. Who dares disturb our sleep? The voice was deep, echoing through the void, shaking the very fabric of the vision world. Alexandra felt the weight of the entity's awareness pressing down on her, and she knew she was standing at the threshold of their domain. Before her, shapes began to emerge, vast, dark figures that stretched beyond her comprehension. They were the entities, their forms shifting and flickering in the darkness, too immense and alien for Alexandra to fully perceive. "Is it you, visionary?" one of them hissed, its voice like the grinding of ancient shells. "The one marked by our seal." Alexandra swallowed hard, trying to keep her thoughts clear, but the weight of their presence was overwhelming. She felt her mind begin to unravel as the entity's eyes turned toward her, each gaze a piercing force that cut through her very soul. Alexandra stammered, her voice barely audible in the vast expanse. "I seek to understand. The power, the emblem." The entities laughed, their voices a terrible cacophony that shook the stars. "You seek to understand," one of them rumbled. "You who bears the emblem of our will. You are but a vessel, visionary, a conduit through which our power flows." Alexandra felt a chill run through her. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why my family?" The entities were silent for a moment, their forms shifting in the darkness. Finally, one of them spoke again, its voice slow and deliberate. "Your bloodline is bound to us," it said. "The emblem you bear is a covenant, a pact made long ago by those who sought our power. Your ancestors called to us visionary. They sought to harness the forces that lie beneath the waves, and in return they gave us their lineage." Alexandra's heart raced. Her family, her ancestors had made a deal with these entities. But for what? And why had she never known? "Why now?" Alexandra asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you waking now?" The entities laughed again, their voices like thunder. "The world is changing, visionary. The veil between the waking world and the vision is thinning. Soon we will break free of our slumber, and the world will be remade in our image." Alexandra felt a surge of panic. "No, I won't let that happen." The entities' laughter faded, and their voices grew colder. "You have no choice," they said. "You are bound to us by the emblem. You cannot escape your fate." Alexandra felt the weight of their words settle over her like a suffocating shroud. Her mind reeled, trying to process what they were saying. Her family had made a pact with the entities, and now, centuries later, that pact was coming to fruition. But why had they done it? What had they gained in return? The entities, sensing her confusion, spoke again. "Your ancestors sought power, visionary," they said. "Power over life and death, over the forces of nature, over the very fabric of reality. And we gave it to them. In return, they bound their bloodline to us, ensuring that one day a descendant would awaken us from our slumber." Alexandra's mind raced. Her family had sought power, and in return, they had enslaved their descendants to the will of these ancient entities. But what could they have possibly wanted that would justify such a terrible price? As if reading her thoughts, the entities continued. "Your family gained much from their pact with us, visionary," they said. They were able to bend reality to their will, to shape the world as they saw fit. But all power comes with a price. Alexandra felt a surge of anger. "And now I have to pay that price." The entities were silent for a moment, their forms shifting in the darkness. "Yes," they said finally. "You are the one chosen to fulfill the covenant. You are the one who will either awaken us." or keep us in slumber. Alexandra's mind was spinning. She had come here seeking answers, but the truth was far more terrifying than she had imagined. Her family had made a deal with these entities, and now she was the one who had to decide whether to continue that legacy or break it. "But what if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling. The entity's laughter echoed through the void. "You cannot refuse, visionary. The emblem binds you to us. You are ours whether you wish it or not." Alexandra clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let the entities awaken and reshape the world in their image. But how could she stop them? The answer came from an unexpected source. "You don't have to fight them alone." Alexandra turned, and there, standing in the midst of the void, was the seal, her aunt's spirit, still in the form of the seal, but now more human in its presence. Its eyes glowed with a strange, otherworldly light, and Alexandra could feel its power radiating outward. "They are not as invincible as they would have you believe," the seal said, its voice calm and steady. "They can be stopped, but you must act quickly." Alexandra stared at her aunt, hope stirring within her. "How?" The seal moved forward, its form shifting once again between the animal and the human. "Their power is tied to the vision. If you can sever their connection to the vision, you can keep them in slumber." Alexandra frowned. "But how do I do that?" The seal looked at her, its eyes filled with a quiet determination. "By going deeper into the vision. You must find the source of their power, the heart of the vision itself, and destroy it." Alexandra swallowed hard, her mind racing. The heart of the vision. It sounded impossible, but if it was the only way to stop the entities, she had to try. With her aunt by her side, Alexandra plunged deeper into the vision. The landscape around her shifted and twisted, growing darker and more distorted with every step. The entity's presence loomed ever closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. But Alexandra pushed forward, determined to find the heart of the vision and end this once and for all. The journey was long and treacherous, filled with nightmarish visions and challenges that tested the limits of Alexandra's sanity. But with her aunt's guidance, she pressed on, drawing closer to the source of the entity's power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the heart of the vision, a vast, pulsating mass of darkness, radiating an intense, almost tangible energy. Alexandra stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the source of the entity's power, the heart of the vision. She stepped forward, her mind filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that destroying the heart would not be easy, and it would come at a cost. But she had no other choice. With a deep breath, Alexandra reached out, her hand trembling as it made contact with the heart of the vision. And then everything exploded. A surge of energy coursed through Alexandra's body, and she felt her mind split apart as the vision world collapsed around her. The entities screamed in rage, their forms writhing and twisting as their power was ripped from them. But Alexandra held on, her will unshakable. She could feel the heart of the vision disintegrating beneath her touch, and with it, the entity's connection to the waking world. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the heart shattered, and the vision world collapsed into darkness. The void collapsed around Alexandra, plunging her into total darkness. The only sensation she could register was the dull throbbing of her heartbeat, echoing in the vast emptiness. For what felt like an eternity, she floated in nothingness, unsure if she had succeeded or merely traded one nightmare for another. But then faint whispers began to stir in the distance. They grew louder, more distinct, until Alexandra realized they were not the voices of the entities, but voices from the waking world. Suddenly she was pulled back, her eyes flew open, and she found herself lying on the cold stone floor of Ravenwood Manor's seaside observatory, the eerie moonlight casting long shadows across the ancient walls. The house was quiet, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for her to return. Her hand, still glowing faintly from the touch of the heart of the vision, felt heavy. The emblem had not vanished, though something about it had changed. It pulsed softly now, not with the malevolent energy of the entities, but with something deeper, older, as if the connection had been severed, but not fully destroyed. Alexandra pushed herself up slowly, her body aching from the ordeal. The seal, her aunt, sat beside her, watching silently. "It's over, isn't it?" Alexandra asked, her voice hoarse. "I stopped them." The seal's eyes glowed softly in the dim light, but it did not respond right away. Alexandra felt a sense of unease creeping over her. "You've delayed them," the seal finally said, its voice echoing in Alexandra's mind. "But the entities do not sleep forever. The vision is not truly destroyed, it is merely fractured for now." Alexandra's heart sank. "So, I didn't end it." The seal shifted, its form blurring between the animal and the human, her aunt's familiar presence comforting yet distant. "You weakened them, but their connection to your bloodline remains. As long as the emblem exists, the entities will always have a way to reach you, or those who come after." Alexandra's mind raced. This was not the victory she had hoped for. The entities were still out there, still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to return. And she was still bound to them by the emblem. "I don't understand," Alexandra said, frustration creeping into her voice. "If I can't destroy the emblem, what was the point?" The seal, her aunt, stood and approached her, its eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "The point, Alexandra, is that you now know the truth. You understand the power you carry and the responsibility that comes with it." Alexandra swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. She looked down at her hand, the emblem still faintly glowing in the darkness. It was no longer just a curse, it was something more. Something she would have to live with and learn to control. "But what if the entities come back?" Alexandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The seal's gaze softened, and for a moment, Alexandra saw her aunt's face clearly, a memory of the woman who had always been a guiding light in her life. "If they return, you will be ready. You have the strength to face them now." Alexandra nodded slowly, though doubt still gnawed at the edges of her mind. She had faced the entities in the vision world, but how could she possibly be ready to face them in the waking world if it came to that? "Why is this?" "The end?" Alexandra asked, her voice heavy with uncertainty. The seal's form shimmered, and for a moment it was fully human again, her aunt standing before her, whole and real. "This is not the end, Alexandra. This is only the beginning." With those words, the seal, her aunt, began to fade, its form dissolving into the shadows of the manor. Alexandra reached out instinctively, but there was nothing to grasp, only the cold air and the lingering presence of something far greater than herself. As the silence settled around her once more, Alexandra was left alone in the dark, the weight of her family's legacy heavy on her shoulders. The entities had been stopped for now, but the emblem on her hand remained a constant reminder of the power that still lurked beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened. And somewhere deep below the waves, the entities stirred in their slumber, their dreams twisting and turning in ways that even Alexandra could not yet comprehend. Days passed, and Alexandra began to explore the manor in greater depth, trying to piece together the fragments of her family's history that had been kept hidden from her for so long. Each room seemed to hold a secret, a memory of those who had come before her, those who had made the pact with the entities, binding their bloodline to a fate they could not escape. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexandra found herself drawn to the old library, its shelves lined with dusty tomes and forgotten relics. She had avoided this room before, feeling a sense of dread every time she passed by, but tonight was different. Something called to her. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of old paper and time-worn wood. The room was vast, its walls lined with books that seemed to stretch on forever. In the center of the room, a large desk stood, covered in ancient scrolls and journals, the remnants of her ancestors' research into the occult. Alexandra hesitated for a moment, then crossed the room to the desk. She picked up one of the journals, its leather cover cracked and worn from centuries of use. As she opened it, the pages felt brittle beneath her fingers, but the writing inside was still legible. The journal belonged to her great-grandmother, one of the key figures in her family's dark past. As Alexandra read, she learned more about the pact that had been made with the entities, how her ancestors had sought power and knowledge beyond the mortal realm, and how they had ultimately paid the price. But there was something else, something buried deep within the pages of the journal. A clue, perhaps, to the mystery that still lingered in Alexandra's mind. She turned to the final entry, written in a shaky hand, as if her great-grandmother had been on the verge of madness when she penned it. The words were scrawled hastily, but their meaning was clear. The emblem. It is not just a curse. It is a key to something far greater than we could have imagined. The entities. They are not the only ones who dwell in the vision. There is something, someone, watching from the shadows, waiting. Alexandra felt a chill run down her spine as she read those words. The entities were not the only forces at play in this twisted reality. There was something else out there, something even more powerful, more dangerous. She closed the journal, her heart pounding in her chest. The revelation was both terrifying and exhilarating. The vision was far more complex than she had realized, and the emblem on her hand was not just a symbol of her family's bondage to the entities. It was a link to something much larger. Alexandra knew then that her journey was far from over. The entities may have been delayed, but there were other forces at work, forces that she would have to confront if she wanted to truly understand the nature of the vision and her place within it. And as she stood in the dimly lit library, the weight of her family's legacy heavy on her shoulders, Alexandra made a silent vow. She would find the truth, no matter the cost. The days blurred into weeks, and Alexandra found herself drawn deeper into the mysteries of her family's past. The manor, once a place of fear and confusion, had become a labyrinth of secrets, each room offering a new revelation, a new piece of the puzzle. But as Alexandra delved deeper into the history of the emblem and the entities, she began to notice strange things happening around her. The air in the manor seemed to hum with an unseen energy, and shadows danced in the corners of her vision, disappearing the moment she turned to look at them. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of her growing obsession with the vision world. But soon, the strange occurrences became too frequent to ignore. Doors would open on their own, lights would flicker without explanation, and at night, Alexandra would hear faint whispers echoing through the halls, as if the manor itself was alive, watching her, waiting for something. One night, as she lay in bed, Alexandra was jolted awake by a loud crash from downstairs. Her heart raced as she sat up, her mind immediately going to the entities and the vision world. Had they found a way to breach the waking world? The moonlight streaming through her bedroom window cast eerie shadows across the room. The seal guided the protagonist to the center of the dreamscape, a beach where the sky seemed to ripple like water. "You think you control this world," a voice echoed, though the seal had not spoken aloud. Alexandra turned sharply, realizing it wasn't her imagination. The voice, deep and resonant, filled her mind, and when she looked at the seal, she saw something different in its eyes, a glint of recognition, a presence far older than anything she had known. "This world was never yours," the voice continued, "but it is tied to you and to all your bloodline." The words reverberated inside her, shaking loose fragments of memories she didn't know she had. Her heart raced as the ground beneath them pulsed with ancient energy. The seal's form flickered, revealing glimpses of another figure, her aunt. But not as she remembered her. Her aunt's face appeared both young and ageless, as if the passage of time held no meaning. You're more than you know, the seal, now fully transformed into the spectral image of her aunt, spoke with a clarity that froze the air. We have all carried this emblem, this connection to the ancient ones, but none have wielded it as you will. Alexandra felt the symbol on her palm burn hotter, and with it, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. Alexandra's pulse quickened as her aunt's apparition loomed over her, a silhouette woven from both shadow and vision. Around them, the dreamscape shimmered with an otherworldly light, bending and warping as if the air itself was alive. The skies churned with dark clouds, and beneath the ocean surface an ancient force stirred, a power Alexandra felt rising to the surface. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, her mind grasping at the enormity of the revelation. "What is this emblem? What does it mean?" Her aunt, now more spirit than woman, knelt beside her, their eyes locking. "The emblem is the key," she said. "The key to worlds beyond this one. It binds you to them just as it binds you to the sleeping entities." Alexandra stared down at the glowing emblem on her palm, feeling its heat intensify. The symbol pulsed like a heartbeat, a silent but undeniable reminder of something greater waiting just beneath the surface of her consciousness. The sensation felt both familiar and foreign, like a memory long forgotten, but now clawing its way back into her mind. "The entities are dreaming," her aunt continued, her voice now tinged with both reverence and dread. "They lie beneath the waves, beneath the manor, waiting. Their slumber is deep but not eternal. One day they will awaken, and it will be through you." The words sent a shiver down Alexandra's spine. She staggered backward, her legs trembling under the weight of the revelation. "But I don't understand. What am I supposed to do?" The ground beneath them trembled as though responding to her words, and the sky darkened further, the swirling clouds now resembling the depths of an ocean. "You were never meant to understand," her aunt replied, her voice softer now. "You were meant to be a vessel, a conduit for their will. But the choice is always yours, whether to accept it or fight it." "Fight it? How can I fight something so vast, so ancient?" "There is power in resistance," her aunt said. "But that power comes with a cost." The seal's form flickered again, and for a moment, Alexandra found herself standing alone on the darkened beach. The air grew cold, and the silence became suffocating. She was surrounded by an eerie stillness, but in the distance, faint whispers began to rise, carried on the wind like the voices of the dead. She knew those voices. They had been haunting her for years, creeping into her dreams, filling her mind with half-formed thoughts and cryptic warnings. But now they seemed louder, more insistent. "What do you want from me?" Alexandra shouted into the darkness, her voice breaking the stillness. "Tell me what I'm supposed to do." The ground trembled again, more violently this time. The earth beneath her cracked open, revealing a gaping abyss that stretched into the infinite. From the depths, a light began to glow, dim at first, but quickly growing brighter, more intense. She backed away from the edge, but the light drew her in, like a moth to a flame. The whispers grew louder, the voices merging into a cacophony that overwhelmed her senses. She covered her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her head now, clawing at her mind, tearing at her sanity. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The ground stilled, the wind died, and the light from the abyss dimmed. For a moment there was silence. Complete and utter silence. Alexandra lowered her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. In the eerie stillness, a figure emerged from the light. It was tall, its body cloaked in shadows, its face obscured. But the emblem on its palm glowed with the same ethereal light as Alexandra's. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, like the tolling of a distant bell. "You've been chosen just as I was." Alexandra took a step forward, her breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure stepped into the dim light, and for the first time Alexandra saw its face, her own face, but older, more worn. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection showed her a version of herself that had lived through untold horrors, had seen things that no mortal should ever witness. "I am what you will become," the figure said, its eyes gleaming with a strange, otherworldly light. "If you continue down this path, if you accept the emblem, this is your future." Alexandra felt her legs give way, and she fell to her knees. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this isn't possible. I can't." "It is already happening," the figure said, stepping closer. "The entities are waking. The power you feel, the dreams, the voices. They are all signs of what's to come. You cannot stop it." "I don't want this," Alexandra said, her voice breaking. "I never asked for this." The figure knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "None of us asked for it," she said softly. "But it is our fate." The ground trembled again, and the light from the abyss grew brighter. The figure stood, its eyes fixed on the glowing emblem on Alexandra's palm. "The time has come," it said, its voice now filled with an unsettling finality. "You must choose. Accept your fate or fight it. But know this, there is no escape. The entities will awaken, whether you are ready or not." Alexandra looked down at the emblem, her heart pounding in her chest. The symbol burned brightly, pulsing with a power she could barely comprehend. She felt the weight of the choice before her, the weight of her fate. And then in the distance she heard the familiar voice of the seal, her aunt, calling to her, guiding her back to the surface of the vision. "Choose wisely," the figure said, its voice fading as the light from the abyss swallowed it whole. Alexandra's pulse quickened as her aunt's apparition loomed over her, a silhouette woven from both shadow and vision. Around them, the dreamscape shimmered with an otherworldly light, bending and warping as if the air itself was alive. The skies churned with dark clouds, and beneath the ground an ancient force stirred, a power Alexandra felt rising to the surface. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, her mind grasping at the enormity of the revelation. "What is this emblem? What does it mean?" Her aunt, now more spirit than woman, knelt beside her, their eyes locking. "The emblem is the key," she said. "The key to worlds beyond this one. It binds you to them just as it binds you to the sleeping entities." Alexandra stared down at the glowing emblem on her palm, feeling its heat intensify. The symbol pulsed like a heartbeat, a silent but undeniable reminder of something greater waiting just beneath the surface of her consciousness. The sensation felt both familiar and foreign, like a memory long forgotten, but now clawing its way back into her mind. "The entities are dreaming," her aunt continued, her voice now tinged with both reverence and dread. "They lie beneath the waves, beneath the manor, waiting. Their slumber is deep but not eternal. One day they will awaken, and it will be through you." The words sent a shiver down Alexandra's spine. She staggered backward, her legs trembling under the weight of the revelation. "But I don't understand. What am I supposed to do?" The ground beneath them trembled as though responding to her words, and the sky darkened further, the swirling clouds now resembling the depths of an ocean. "You were never meant to understand," her aunt replied, her voice softer now. "You were meant to be a vessel, a conduit for their will. But the choice is always yours, whether to accept it or fight it." "Fight it? How can I fight something so vast, so ancient?" "There is power in resistance," her aunt said. "But that power comes with a cost." The seal's form flickered again, and for a moment, Alexandra found herself standing alone on the darkened beach. The air grew cold, and the silence became suffocating. She was surrounded by an eerie stillness, but in the distance, faint whispers began to rise, carried on the wind like the voices of the dead. She knew those voices. They had been haunting her for years, creeping into her dreams, filling her mind with half-formed thoughts and cryptic warnings. But now they seemed louder, more insistent. "What do you want from me?" Alexandra shouted into the darkness, her voice breaking the stillness. "Tell me what I'm supposed to do." The ground trembled again, more violently this time. The sand beneath her split open, revealing a gaping chasm that stretched into the infinite depths of the ocean floor. From the depths, a blue light began to glow, dim at first, but quickly growing brighter, more intense. She backed away from the edge, but the light drew her in, like a moth to a flame. The whispers grew louder, the voices merging into a cacophony that overwhelmed her senses. She covered her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her head now, clawing at her mind, tearing at her sanity. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The ground stilled, the wind died, and the light from the chasm dimmed. For a moment there was silence. Complete and utter silence. Alexandra lowered her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. In the eerie stillness, a figure emerged from the light. It was tall, its body cloaked in what appeared to be flowing seaweed, its face obscured. But the emblem on its palm glowed with the same ethereal light as Alexandra's. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, like the tolling of a distant bell beneath the waves. "You've been chosen just as I was." Alexandra took a step forward, her breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure stepped into the dim light, and for the first time Alexandra saw its face, her own face, but older, more worn. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection showed her a version of herself that had lived through untold horrors, had seen things that no mortal should ever witness. "I am what you will become," the figure said, its eyes gleaming with a strange, otherworldly blue light. "If you continue down this path, if you accept the emblem, this is your future." Alexandra felt her legs give way, and she fell to her knees on the damp sand. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this isn't possible. I can't." "It is already happening," the figure said, stepping closer. "The entities are waking. The power you feel, the dreams, the voices. They are all signs of what's to come. You cannot stop it." "I don't want this," Alexandra said, her voice breaking. "I never asked for this." The figure knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "None of us asked for it," she said softly. "But it is our fate." The ground trembled again, and the light from the chasm grew brighter. The figure stood, its eyes fixed on the glowing emblem on Alexandra's palm. "The time has come," it said, its voice now filled with an unsettling finality. "You must choose. Accept your fate or fight it. But know this, there is no escape. The entities will awaken, whether you are ready or not." Alexandra looked down at the emblem, her heart pounding in her chest. The symbol burned brightly, pulsing with a power she could barely comprehend. She felt the weight of the choice before her, the weight of her fate. And then in the distance, she heard the familiar voice of the seal, her aunt, calling to her, guiding her back to the surface of the vision. "Choose wisely," the figure said, its voice fading as the light from the chasm swallowed it whole. As the vision of the future self dissolved, Alexandra felt a cold sweat form on her brow. She was back in the dreamscape, the strange twilight world where time twisted and shifted, where nothing was real, yet everything mattered. The presence of her aunt in the form of the seal was comforting but unsettling at the same time. The seal padded closer, its eyes glinting with intelligence far beyond that of any earthly creature. Its breath fogged in the cool air as it spoke, but not in words. The voice came directly into Alexandra's mind, clear and resonant. "Do you understand now?" The voice was calm, patient. "The path ahead is not one you chose, but it is the one that has been laid before you. The entities stir beneath the waves. You have felt it, haven't you? Alexandra nodded slowly, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what she had witnessed. I felt something, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But I don't know what it means. These entities, these forces, they're beyond me. I don't even understand why this is happening to me. The seal, or rather her aunt, tilted its head, considering the words. It's because of the bloodline, the voice explained. Our family has always been tied to the ancient ones. The emblem on your palm, it's not just a symbol. It's a contract, a bond between you and those that lie beneath. Alexandra's gaze drifted to the emblem, which still glowed faintly, even here in the vision. She traced the intricate design with her fingers, feeling a strange warmth emanating from it. It wasn't just a mark, it was alive, pulsating with a hidden energy. But why me? She asked again, frustration creeping into her voice. What does this have to do with me? I didn't ask for any of this. The seal sat down on its haunches, watching her with a patience that only a creature tied to ancient mysteries could have. You didn't ask, it said, but you were chosen. The entities do not care for what mortals desire. They move through time and space, indifferent to the whims of humans. But they saw something in you. A potential. And now they have begun to wake. The ground trembled beneath them, ever so slightly, as if to punctuate the words. Alexandra's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed answers, clearer ones than cryptic warnings and vague hints of destiny. If they're waking, she began, her voice stronger now, what am I supposed to do? You said I had a choice, to accept this fate or to fight it. But how can I fight something I don't even understand? The seal's eyes glowed brighter for a moment, and then it turned, facing the distance. The landscape had changed again, as it always did in these visions. The shoreline had given way to a vast, dark ocean. The water was ancient and still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the twisted sky above. Follow me, the seal said, gliding forward into the ocean. There are things you must see. Things that will help you understand. Alexandra hesitated, glancing at the shifting landscape around her. This place, this world, nothing stayed the same for long. It was all too easy to lose yourself in the labyrinth of the dreamscape. And yet she felt a strange pull, an urge to follow the seal deeper into the shadows. Reluctantly, she took a step forward, then another. The water felt surprisingly warm as she ventured into the ocean, the waves closing in around her like silent sentinels. The sky above had darkened, and the only light came from the faint glow of the emblem on her palm. As they swam, the seal's voice continued to resonate in her mind. The entities that sleep beneath the waves are ancient beyond comprehension. They were here long before mankind, long before the world as you know it. They dream of the times before time, of worlds that have been forgotten, and of powers that can reshape reality itself. Alexandra listened intently, the weight of the words pressing down on her. And what do they want with me? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. They want you to be their vessel, the seal replied, to carry their will into the waking world. The emblem you bear, it is both a gift and a curse. It grants you power, yes, but it also binds you to them. As long as the emblem is on your skin, you are connected to their dreams. And as they awaken, so too will their influence over you grow. The water around them seemed to whisper, currents swirling in patterns that shouldn't exist. Alexandra shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her, even though she was underwater. So I'm just supposed to let them take over. Is that it? No, the seal said, stopping in its tracks. It turned to face her, its eyes locking onto hers. That is where your choice comes in. You can accept the power they offer, use it to your advantage. Or you can resist, try to sever the bond. But either way, the entities will wake. And when they do, the world will change. Alexandra felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still terrifying. "And if I fight it?" she asked. "If I try to break free?" The seal was silent for a moment, as if considering its answer. Finally it spoke. "There are ways to weaken the bond," it said. "But they come at a cost. You would need to enter their realm fully, confront them in their slumber. It is a dangerous path, and one that few have survived with their sanity intact." Alexandra swallowed hard, her mouth dry despite being surrounded by water. "But it's possible." "It is," the seal confirmed. "But you must be prepared for the consequences. The entities do not take kindly to defiance. And even if you succeed, the emblem will never truly leave you. It will always be a part of you, a reminder of the power you once held and the price you paid to escape it." They had reached the heart of the ocean now. In the center of a deeper blue expanse stood an ancient stone altar, covered in coral and sea growth. The water around it hummed with a strange energy, and Alexandra could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The seal approached the altar, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. "This is where it begins," it said. "This is where you make your choice." The ocean depths felt timeless, like they had been untouched for millennia. The stone altar seemed older than the sea itself, its surface worn smooth by the passage of countless currents. Alexandra approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper despite being underwater. The seal, still swimming beside the altar, looked up at her with knowing eyes. "This is where the bond was first forged," it said. "Long before you were born, long before our family even knew the power that ran through its veins." Alexandra's hand went instinctively to the emblem on her palm. The glowing symbol seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, growing warmer the closer she got to the altar. She could feel it drawing her in, as if the very stones themselves were calling to her. "And what am I supposed to do here?" she asked, a hint of fear creeping into her voice. The seal swam upward, its body casting a long shadow across the ocean floor. "You have two choices," it said. "You can place your hand on the altar, accept the power that has been offered to you, and become a vessel for the entities. Or you can try to resist, to break free of the bond and sever your connection to them." Alexandra stared at the altar, her mind racing. She had come so far, seen so much, but the idea of submitting to the will of ancient, slumbering entities was terrifying. And yet the thought of fighting them, of entering their realm and risking everything, was equally daunting. "What happens if I accept?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "If you accept, you will gain power beyond anything you've ever known," the seal explained. "The entities will grant you their strength, their knowledge, their ability to shape reality itself. But in return, you will be bound to them forever. You will become their servant, their tool. And when they awaken fully, you will be their herald." The words hung in the water like a dark cloud. Alexandra took a step back, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of the decision before her. "And if I refuse?" she asked. The seal's eyes glowed even brighter. "If you refuse, you will have to enter their realm, confront them in their dreams. You will have to face the entities themselves and find a way to sever the bond. It is a dangerous path, one that few have survived. But if you succeed, you will be free. The emblem will fade, and the entities will lose their hold on you." Alexandra's heart raced. Both options seemed impossible, yet she knew she had to choose. The weight of her family's legacy, of the power that had been passed down through generations, pressed heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't help but wonder what her ancestors had done, what choices they had made to bring her to this moment. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice cracking. The seal swam closer to her, its gaze softening. "You're stronger than you think," it said. You've already come this far. The fact that you're here, standing at the crossroads, means you have the strength to face whatever comes next. Alexandra looked down at the emblem on her palm. It was glowing brighter now, as if it could sense the decision that was about to be made. She could feel the power thrumming beneath her skin, the ancient energy that had been passed down through her bloodline for centuries. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath despite being underwater. "I need to know more," she said. "Before I make my decision, I need to understand. You said the entities are waking, but why now? What's changed?" The seal hesitated for a moment, as if considering its answer. "The world is changing," it said finally. "The boundaries between realms are thinning. The entities have sensed this, and their slumber has grown restless. They are stirring because they feel the time is near for their return." Alexandra frowned. "And what happens if they return? What will they do?" The seal's gaze grew dark. "They will reshape the world in their image," it said. "Reality as you know it will cease to exist. The entities have no regard for human life, for human desires. They see the world as something to be molded, to be controlled. If they awaken, everything will change." A cold chill ran down Alexandra's spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was terrifying. "And there's no way to stop them?" she asked. "There is always a way," the seal replied. "But it requires great sacrifice. The entities can be delayed, perhaps even put back into their slumber, but it will not be easy. And it may come at the cost of your own life." Alexandra swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the ocean around her. "So those are my options," she said. "Become their vessel or try to stop them and risk losing everything." The seal nodded. "Those are the choices before you. But remember, once you make your decision, there is no turning back." Alexandra took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had always known that her family was different, that there was something strange about the emblem on her palm. But she had never imagined that it would come to this, that she would be standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss of ancient, unknowable entities. She looked at the altar, then back at the seal, her aunt, her guide. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but she knew that she couldn't avoid it any longer. "I need time to think," she said finally. "I can't make this decision right now." The seal regarded her with a knowing look. "The entities are patient," it said. "But their patience is not infinite. The longer you wait, the more they will stir. The more they will influence your dreams, your thoughts. The choice will not get any easier with time." Alexandra nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. But still, she couldn't bring herself to choose, not yet. "I'll be back," she said, turning away from the altar. "I just need time." The seal watched her as she swam away, its glowing eyes following her into the shadows of the deep. "You don't have much," it said softly, though Alexandra was already too far away to hear. As Alexandra ventured deeper into the ocean, the weight of her decision bore down on her like an anchor. The currents around her seemed to whisper, the water flowing in patterns that defied nature, as if the very world itself was aware of the burden she carried. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, and her mind churned with thoughts of the ancient entities and the power they held. The seal's words echoed in her mind. The choice will not get any easier with time. But how could she make such a decision without knowing the full scope of what she was facing? The ancient entities, the emblem on her palm, the power that coursed through her veins, none of it made sense. She needed answers, but she knew that those answers wouldn't come easily. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rumble. The ocean floor beneath her shook violently, and she stumbled, nearly losing her balance. The seal barked sharply, and Alexandra looked up to see a massive figure emerging from the mountains ahead. It was a colossal entity, towering over the seascape, its body composed of swirling water and shadow. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and as it moved, the very ocean around it seemed to tremble with its presence. Alexandra's heart raced. This was no ordinary creature. This was one of the entities, an ancient being that had existed long before her time. And it was coming for her. The seal growled, positioning itself in front of Alexandra as if to protect her. But the entity paid no attention to the seal. Its glowing eyes were fixed on Alexandra, and it raised a massive hand, pointing directly at her. A voice deep and resonant echoed in Alexandra's mind. "You dare enter our realm." Alexandra swallowed hard, her legs trembling beneath her. But she stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I've come to break the bond," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I've come to free myself from your control." The entity's laughter rumbled through the water, shaking the very ocean floor. "Foolish mortal," it said, "you are bound by forces far beyond your understanding. You think you can break the bond. You think you can defy us." Alexandra clenched her fists, feeling the emblem on her palm pulse with energy. "I won't be your pawn," she said through gritted teeth. "Not anymore." The entity's eyes gleamed with malice. "You will always be ours," it said. "No mortal can escape the will of the entities. You are nothing but a vessel, a tool for our power." Alexandra's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. She had come too far to turn back now. She had faced the entities in their own realm, and she wasn't about to let them win. "I will find a way," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I will break free." The entity's laughter echoed once more, but there was a hint of something else in its tone, something like doubt. "We shall see," the entity said, its voice fading as its massive form dissolved into the swirling currents. Alexandra stood there, breathing heavily, her heart racing. The seal nudged her leg, and she looked down to see its calm, steady gaze. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She wasn't done yet. As the entity's presence faded into the dark waters, Alexandra's mind buzzed with the weight of the encounter. The words of the ancient being echoed in her thoughts, "You will always be ours." The finality in that statement sent a chill down her spine, but there was also a flicker of hope. The hint of doubt in the entity's tone hadn't gone unnoticed. The seal at her side nudged her gently, urging her to move forward. She could feel the pull of something greater, an unseen force guiding her deeper into the vision realm. There was more to discover, more to understand, and she wasn't about to give up now. As they ventured further, the landscape continued to shift and warp. The underwater mountains in the distance loomed larger, their peaks stretching impossibly high into the water above. The ground beneath her feet changed texture with every step, from jagged coral to smooth, polished stone to a strange, gelatinous substance that clung to her steps. It was disorienting, but Alexandra pressed on, her mind set on her goal. After what felt like hours of swimming, they arrived at the base of one of the towering underwater mountains. A narrow path wound its way up the steep incline, disappearing into the thick bioluminescent mist that clung to the mountain slopes. The seal barked softly, as if urging her to continue. Taking a deep breath, Alexandra began to climb. The path was treacherous, with loose rocks and unstable footing, but she moved with determination, her eyes focused on the distant peak. The higher she climbed, the colder the water became, and soon she was shivering in the thin, biting currents. The seal swam alongside her, seemingly unaffected by the cold, its fur shimmering with an otherworldly glow. As they ascended, the mist grew thicker, swirling around them in thick, opaque tendrils. It clung to her skin, cold and wet, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. But Alexandra pushed forward, trusting her instincts and the presence of the seal at her side. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a plateau near the mountain's peak. The mist cleared slightly, revealing a large, ancient temple carved into the mountainside. Its walls were covered in intricate carvings of strange symbols and figures, and the water around it buzzed with a palpable energy. The seal barked softly, and Alexandra turned to it with a questioning look. "Is this it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The seal's eyes gleamed with intelligence, and it let out a low growl before swimming toward the temple's entrance. Alexandra followed, her heart pounding in her chest. This was what she had been searching for, the heart of the vision realm, the place where the entity's power was strongest. As they approached the entrance, the water grew thick with a strange, oppressive force. Alexandra could feel the weight of the entity's presence all around her, pressing down on her like a physical burden. Her legs felt heavy, her movements slow and labored, but she forced herself to keep going. Inside, the temple was dimly lit by bioluminescent flora that lined the walls. The carvings continued along the stone surfaces, depicting scenes of ancient rituals and offerings, of human figures bowing before massive, tentacled beings emerging from the deep. At the far end of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, and above it, suspended in the water, was a glowing, pulsating orb of blue light. The seal stopped in its tracks, its gaze fixed on the orb. It let out a soft whine, and for the first time, Alexandra saw a flicker of hesitation in its eyes. "What is it?" she asked, kneeling down to look the seal in the eyes. The seal stared back at her, its eyes filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. Then, without warning, the seal's form began to shimmer and shift. Alexandra gasped as the seal's body dissolved into a cloud of light, reforming into the shape of a woman, an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Alexandra's heart skipped a beat. "Aunt Marina," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. The woman nodded, her smile bittersweet. "Yes, it's me," she said, her voice soft and soothing. "I've been with you all along." Tears welled up in Alexandra's eyes as she stared at the woman who had raised her. The woman who had been like a mother to her after her own had passed away in a tragic sailing accident. "But how?" Alexandra asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible?" Her aunt's smile faded slightly, and her gaze turned serious. "I've been watching over you, guiding you, ever since I disappeared during that storm. The vision realm. It's where I've been ever since. And now I'm here to help you understand." Alexandra swallowed hard, her mind reeling with the revelation. "Understand what?" Her aunt stepped closer, placing a hand on Alexandra's shoulder. "The entities, the emblem, everything, it's all connected to our family. The power you've been struggling with, the visions, the nightmares, they're not just random. They're a part of your heritage, passed down through generations." Alexandra stared at her aunt in shock. "Our family. We're connected to the entities." Her aunt nodded. "Yes, long ago, one of our ancestors made a pact with the entities of the deep. In exchange for power over the sea and its secrets, they agreed to serve the entities in the vision realm, to act as their vessels in the mortal world. That's why the emblem appeared on you. It's a sign of that pact." Alexandra's mind raced, trying to process the information. "But why? Why was this pact made? And why me?" Her aunt's expression darkened. "The pact was made out of desperation. Our ancestors sought to protect the family from a great shipwreck, and the entities offered a way. But the price was steep. Every generation, one member of our family is chosen to bear the emblem, to carry the burden of the entity's power." Alexandra clenched her fists, feeling the emblem on her palm burn with energy. "So I'm just a pawn in their game." Her aunt shook her head. "No, you're more than that. You have the power to break the cycle, to end the pact once and for all. But it won't be easy. The entities are ancient and powerful, and they won't let go of their hold on our family without a fight." Alexandra looked down at the emblem on her palm, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. She had always felt like her life was not her own, like she was being controlled by forces beyond her understanding. But now, for the first time, she saw a way out, a chance to reclaim her freedom. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. Her aunt's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on Alexandra's shoulder. "You must enter the heart of the vision realm, confront the entities, and sever the bond that ties our family to them. It won't be easy, and it will require great strength and sacrifice. But I believe in you." Alexandra took a deep breath, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. But she knew she had no choice. If she wanted to be free, if she wanted to save her family, she had to face the entities. With one final nod from her aunt, Alexandra stepped forward, toward the glowing orb of light that pulsed above the altar. The water around her buzzed with energy, and as she reached out to touch the orb, a blinding light enveloped her. As the light engulfed her, Alexandra felt her consciousness being pulled deeper into the core of the vision realm. Time seemed to stretch, and her senses blurred, as though she were no longer in control of her own body. When the light finally dimmed, she found herself floating in a vast expanse of darkness, with only the pulsating glow of the orb hovering in front of her. It felt like the world had dissolved into pure energy. She could no longer feel the water around her, no longer hear the currents or the sounds of the temple. It was just her and the orb, alive with an indescribable power, its glow almost hypnotic. "You've come this far," a voice echoed from all directions, a voice that sounded like her own but layered with countless others. "But do you truly understand the cost of breaking the pact?" Alexandra clenched her fists, staring at the orb. "I don't care about the cost. I want my family to be free. I want to be free." The orb seemed to pulsate in response, its glow intensifying. "Freedom is an illusion. Power is the only reality." Suddenly, the darkness around her began to shift and twist, forming vague shapes and figures. Shadows of long-forgotten memories flickered into view, images of her ancestors, bound to the entities, their faces etched with despair. She saw her own life play out before her, every decision, every thought twisted by the unseen hand of the entities. Then, out of the swirling darkness, figures began to materialize, ancient, towering beings with elongated limbs and faces that shifted like the depths of the ocean. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their presence made the water around her crackle with energy. "The entities. Why do you resist?" one of the entities intoned, its voice reverberating through Alexandra's very bones. "You are one of us. You cannot escape your fate." Alexandra felt the emblem on her palm burning again, more intensely than ever before. The pain shot up her arm, spreading through her body, but she gritted her teeth and stood her ground. "I'm not one of you," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I'm my own person, and I'll break the pact no matter what." The entities moved closer, their forms shifting and blending into one another, becoming an indistinguishable mass of power. The water grew heavy with their presence, and Alexandra could feel her strength draining, her will faltering. Then, just as she was about to collapse under the weight of their power, a familiar voice echoed in her mind. "Remember what I told you," her aunt's voice whispered. "You're stronger than you know. You have the power to end this." With a surge of determination, Alexandra straightened, her eyes blazing with defiance. She raised her hand, the emblem glowing brighter than ever before, and focused all her energy on the orb. The entities hissed in unison, their forms becoming more agitated. "You will regret this," they snarled, their voices filled with malice. But Alexandra didn't waver. She channeled every ounce of her will into the orb, forcing it to obey her command. The light grew brighter, blinding in its intensity, and the entities let out a deafening roar as they began to dissolve into the light, their forms unraveling like seaweed in a current. The ocean floor beneath her shook violently, and cracks began to form in the fabric of the vision realm. Reality itself seemed to be tearing apart. And then, with a deafening explosion of light, everything went black. When Alexandra opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the cold, stone floor of the temple. The orb was gone, and the oppressive presence of the entities had vanished. The water was still almost serene. She slowly sat up, feeling the weight of her body return. The emblem on her palm was no longer glowing. It was faint, barely visible, as though it had been drained of its power. She had done it. The pact was broken. But as she stood, something felt wrong. The temple around her was no longer the same. The carvings on the walls had changed, now depicting scenes of chaos and destruction. The water felt thick with something dark, something malevolent. And then she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper in the back of her mind. "We're not gone," the voice said, cold and mocking. "You afraid us." Alexandra's heart skipped a beat, and she spun around, looking for the source of the voice. But there was nothing there. Just the empty temple and the weight of the truth sinking in. She hadn't destroyed the entities. She had freed them. The pact, the emblem, everything had been a cage, a prison that had kept the entities trapped in the vision realm. By breaking it, she had unleashed them into the real world. A wave of dread washed over her as the implications of her actions became clear. The entities were no longer bound by the rules of the vision realm. They were free to do as they pleased, to exert their will over the mortal world. And she was the one who had set them loose. As the realization settled in, the temple began to shake again, the ocean floor cracking beneath her feet. The walls of the temple seemed to warp and shift, as though the fabric of reality itself was unraveling. Alexandra stumbled back, her mind racing. There had to be a way to fix this, to undo what she had done. But how? The entities were ancient, powerful beyond comprehension. How could she possibly stop them now? Suddenly the seal, her aunt, reappeared beside her, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," the aunt said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know this would happen." Alexandra looked at her, panic rising in her chest. "What do we do? How do we stop them?" Her aunt shook her head slowly. "I don't know if we can." As the temple continued to crumble around them, Alexandra felt a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had set in motion something far beyond her control, something that could very well destroy everything she had ever known. And there was no turning back. Alexandra stood frozen as the temple continued to collapse around her. Her aunt, the seal, glanced at her with the same sorrowful expression. But then something changed. The emblem on Alexandra's palm began to glow once again, brighter than before, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the tremors of the crumbling world around them. "You've unleashed them," her aunt whispered, but her tone was different now. There was no regret in it, only a hint of something sinister. "But it's not over. There's more to this than you realize." Alexandra looked at her aunt, confusion and dread swirling inside her. "What do you mean?" "I thought..." Her aunt's eyes suddenly glowed with a strange, unsettling light. "You thought you could control it. You thought you could break the pact without consequences. But this was never about breaking it." Her voice grew darker, deeper, almost unrecognizable. "This was about transforming it." The water around them seemed to thicken, growing colder, as a creeping realization dawned on Alexandra. The emblem on her palm, it wasn't just a symbol of the entity's power. It was something much worse. It was a slave. "You weren't just a pawn in this game," the aunt continued, her voice now laced with malice. "You were always part of it. The entities didn't control you, you controlled them. And now they've fused with you. Alexandra's heart raced, panic setting in. No, that's not possible, she stammered, but the burning sensation in her palm spread, enveloping her whole arm. She could feel something stirring deep inside her, as if the entity's very essence had taken root within her soul. The ant, no longer the comforting figure she once was, moved closer, a twisted grin on her face. You've become the vessel. The entities live within you now, their power flowing through your veins. You will reshape this world, whether you like it or not. Alexandra's vision blurred as the power inside her surged. She could feel reality warping around her, the boundaries between the vision realm and the waking world shattering. She was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. Her body trembled with the weight of oceanic energy, a force far beyond her comprehension. And then, in an instant, everything went still. The temple was gone. The ruins, the collapsing walls, vanished. Alexandra stood alone in a vast, endless void of deep blue water. She could no longer feel the ocean floor beneath her, no longer sense the boundaries of her own body. She had become one with the entities. Her aunt's voice echoed in the distance, though her form was nowhere to be seen. You'll create new worlds now, bend reality to your will. But remember, with this power comes a price. You are no longer who you were. You are something more. Alexandra's mind reeled, struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. She had set out to free herself from the entities, only to become their avatar. Their present, their creator. The last thing she saw before the void consumed her entirely was the emblem on her palm, glowing brighter than ever, now etched with intricate symbols she couldn't understand. A reminder that her fate was no longer her own. The entities had won. Or had they, by the sound of movement behind her. Turning sharply, she saw a figure emerging from the shadows of the deep. It was a woman, her face half hidden by flowing blue hair that moved like living kelp. Her eyes gleamed with a strange, ethereal light, and she moved with an eerie grace, as if she were gliding through the ocean rather than swimming. Who are you? Alexandra asked, her hand instinctively going to the emblem on her palm. The woman smiled faintly. I am one who knows the path you walk, she said, her voice soft yet commanding, even underwater. I have walked it myself long ago. Alexandra's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Have you dealt with the entities? She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving Alexandra's. I too bore the emblem, she said, lifting her wrist to reveal a faint, glowing symbol on her own palm. It was faded, barely visible, but it was unmistakably the same emblem that Alexandra bore. I too faced the choice you now face. Alexandra's heart raced. And what did you choose? The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep sorrow. I chose wrong, she said quietly. I became a vessel for their power. For a time, I thought I could control it. I thought I could use it to shape the world as I saw fit. But the entities, they are not easily controlled. She moved closer, her eyes gleaming with intensity. The more power I wielded, the more they took from me. My will, my mind, my very soul. Piece by piece they consumed me, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, a puppet for their desires. Alexandra felt a chill run down her spine. And no, the woman's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. Now I am but a shadow of what I once was. A warning, if you will, to those who come after me. The entities have allowed me to linger, to serve as a reminder of what happens to those who give themselves to their will. Alexandra swallowed hard, her throat dry despite being underwater. So you're saying, there's no hope, that no matter what I choose, I'll lose. The woman shook her head. There is always hope, she said, but it is a fragile thing, easily lost. The entities are not invincible. They can be resisted, but it requires great strength and cunning. And even then, the cost is high. Her eyes bore into Alexandra's, filled with a deep, unspoken pain. You must choose carefully, for once the choice is made, there is no turning back. Alexandra stood in silence, her mind swirling with uncertainty. She had always known that the emblem was a curse, but she had never imagined the full extent of the danger it represented. Now standing before this woman, a living testament to the horrors of the entity's power, she realized just how close she was to losing herself. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The woman moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "But strength alone will not be enough. You must also be wise. You must understand the nature of the power you carry and the dangers it brings." She gestured to the waters around them, where shadows seemed to flicker and dance in the corners of Alexandra's vision. "The entities are always watching. They are always waiting. And they will use every trick, every manipulation to turn you to their will." Alexandra clenched her fists, feeling the emblem on her palm pulse with a faint warmth. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The woman's gaze softened. "You must find a way to sever the bond," she said. "You must enter their realm, confront them in their own dreams. Only there can you truly understand their power and find a way to break free." Her words struck a chord within Alexandra. The dream realm. It had always been a place of mystery, a place where the entities held sway. But it was also a place where she had glimpsed the truth, where she had seen the boundaries between reality and dream blur. "How do I enter their realm?" she asked, determination creeping into her voice. The woman smiled faintly. "You already know the way," she said. "The visions you've been having, they are the key. The entities are trying to lure you into their domain, to trap you in their web of illusions. But if you can navigate the dream world with a clear mind, you can turn the tables on them." Alexandra nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in her mind. She had always been able to control her visions to some extent, but now she would have to take it a step further. She would have to face the entities on their own turf, challenge them in their own realm. But before she could act, the woman moved back, her form beginning to fade into the deep ocean currents. "Remember," she said, her voice growing faint. "The entities are ancient and powerful, but they are not omnipotent. They can be outwitted, but only if you keep your wits about you." And with that, she was gone, leaving Alexandra standing alone in the ocean depths once more. She looked down at the emblem on her palm, feeling the power coursing through her. The entities were watching, waiting for her to make her move. But this time, she wouldn't be a pawn in their game. This time, she would be the one to set the rules. The night was still, but the weight of the woman's words lingered in the water. Alexandra took a deep breath and gazed at the emblem on her palm, feeling the pulsating power beneath her skin. The ancient entities, the dream realm, the promise of freedom, it all seemed so distant and unreachable, yet she knew she had no choice. If she wanted to reclaim her life, to rid herself of this curse, she had to face them. As she moved deeper into the ocean, a low murmur reached her ears. She froze, scanning the water around her. From the shadows emerged a pair of glowing eyes, watching her intently. Her heart pounded in her chest as the figure swam forward, revealing the seal from her visions, the same one that had guided her before. The seal approached cautiously, its fur shimmering under the otherworldly light. There was something familiar in its gaze, something that stirred Alexandra's memory. She knelt down in the sand, extending a hand, and the seal nuzzled it gently before pressing its head against her palm. "You again," Alexandra whispered. "Are you here to guide me?" The seal's eyes gleamed with a strange intelligence, and it let out a soft bark as if in response. Slowly it turned and began swimming, glancing back at Alexandra as if urging her to follow. Without hesitation, she stood and followed after the seal, deeper into the ocean. As they swam, the water around them seemed to shift. The ocean took on an otherworldly glow, its currents swaying in patterns that defied nature. The stars reflected in the surface above twinkled unnaturally, brighter and closer than they should have been. It was as if the boundary between reality and the vision realm was blurring, folding in on itself. Suddenly, the seal stopped at the edge of what appeared to be an underwater ravine. Alexandra followed its gaze and saw a massive stone archway standing in the center of the abyss, ancient runes carved into its surface. A faint light pulsed from the archway, beckoning her forward. "This is it, isn't it?" Alexandra asked, though she wasn't sure if she was asking the seal or herself. The seal let out another soft bark and nudged her leg, urging her toward the archway. Alexandra took a step forward, then another, until she was standing just before the entrance. The water was thick with a strange energy, the kind that made her skin prickle with anticipation and fear. Taking a deep breath, she swam through the archway. The world around her seemed to dissolve, melting away into a sea of swirling colors and shifting shapes. Her senses were overwhelmed, sights, sounds, and sensations she couldn't begin to describe washed over her all at once. She felt like she was falling and floating at the same time, suspended in a place that existed beyond time and space. And then with a sudden jolt, she landed. She found herself standing in a vast, desolate seascape. The sky above was a swirling vortex of dark clouds, crackling with electrical currents that resembled bioluminescent creatures. The ocean floor beneath her feet was cracked and barren, stretching out endlessly in all directions. In the distance, towering underwater mountains loomed, their peaks shrouded in a strange, luminous mist. The seal was by her side, watching her carefully. "This is the vision realm," Alexandra muttered, her voice barely audible despite being underwater. "The realm of the entities." The seal barked softly in response, as if confirming her thoughts. As Alexandra took in her surroundings, she felt a presence, an overwhelming, oppressive force watching her from the shadows. The entities were here. She could feel their eyes on her, studying her, waiting to see what she would do next. She took a deep breath and began to swim, the seal gliding alongside her. The landscape seemed to shift with every movement she made, the ocean floor warping and changing beneath her. One moment she was swimming over cracked coral, the next she was navigating through thick, viscous kelp forests. The water shifted from deep blue to an eerie green, and the mountains in the distance seemed to move closer and farther away at random. This was a world ruled by the entity's whims, a place where reality bent to their will. As they swam, Alexandra's mind raced. She knew she needed to confront the entities, to find a way to break the bond they held over her. But how? What could she possibly do against beings so ancient and powerful? Her thoughts were interrupted. Thank you for listening till the end. I hope you were able to relax and will now get a good rest. And don't worry, new stories are already on the way for tomorrow. So don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to stay connected. Now have a good night. See you in the next episode.